Somewhere beyond the recesses of time and space, two podcasters are set adrift in a machine, picking up transmissions of movies that are forgotten but not gone.
Welcome to Movie Memory Machine, the only podcast about forgotten movies that only lets the right ones in. I am your host, Landen Solano, joined always by my co-host, Truman Caps. Truman, it's good to see you, and that's how I know you're not a vampire.
Well, that's good of you to say that, Landon. I'm glad that you think it's good to see me because, frankly, I don't know. I don't feel like I look that good right now. You know, I've got hands falling off, my ear came off, one of my eyes, as you can see, has rolled away.
Truman, you're beautiful to me in any form you take.
Thank you, Landon. I just appreciate that you can look by the fact that I have a bad case of the dropsies, but I still decided to come to the studio today.
That doesn't sound like what it probably is meant to sound like. Oops, I got the dropsies. I know...
People have belittled the dropsies, which is a very serious condition, for too long, and I think the problem is because of the name, and it's just unfortunate that the dropsies was discovered and cataloged by Dr. Franklin Dropsies. It makes it sound a lot more playful than it actually is.
Not the only movie in the 90s that has a character that has the dropsies. We'll get to it in a second, but I have an important question for you.
Let me know. What's the question?
What is your favorite rule of vampires?
My favorite rule of vampires probably is that they have to be invited into your house. I think.
Does it make you feel protected? It's just like, what the fuck are you gonna do? I'm not gonna invite you in.
It makes me. On the one hand, it makes me feel protected. On the other hand, it makes me feel very vulnerable because I am a pushover, and I don't want anyone to ever feel like I'm being mean to them or anything. So I would most likely. Like, just based on sheer guilt alone, I would just invite a vampire in.
They don't even have to use their mind tricks on you.
No, not at all.
It's just like, really? And then your guilt would overcome you and you'd let them in.
You Landon, are a Midwesterner, so I feel like you would also be very susceptible to a little bit of guilt for the invite in.
I know.
No?
I'm still an LA city boy at heart. I clash with the Midwest politeness a lot here. But listen, I'm glad you said the invitation thing because it's one of, every single vampire rule has so many exceptions and nonsensical, parameters around it.
Oh, sure. But you love parameters.
The invitation one is one that particularly sticks in my craw because it's like, okay, do you have to own the house or do you just have to be in the house?
Oh, yeah.
So, like, if you were visiting someone and you were staying in their guest house, or you were doing an Airbnb, could they enter, or would they need to get the express consent of the owner of the Airbnb for you to enter? What if it's owned by a corporation?
Yeah, what's the vampire stance on ADUs? You know, if you're living in a casita unit out back, do they need to only get permission from the person who owns the plot of land, or do you, the lessee, have to invite them in?
What about squatters' rights?
Yeah, exactly. Why aren't there any vampire movies about a vampire infiltrating a circle of crust punks in like London in the 1980s who have just taken up residence in someone's flat?
Here's another part. Where does the bubble of protection begin? Is it just the threshold of your doorway? Does it go into the ground? How far down? How far up does it go?
Yeah.
Like, if there was a hole in your roof, would they have to be invited in through the hole in the roof?
Yeah.
Could they dig a tunnel underneath your house and try to like penetrate through the floorboards, like Tremor style? Could they bust through your your shelter?
Yeah, and also, what's the vampire stance on camping? What's the deal with tents?
A tent?
If you go in a tent, you're being chased by a vampire, you go in a tent and you zip the thing up, zzz, does that mean the vampire can't get you? Like Dracula has to just stand outside and be like, dude, please, this is cheap.
You are protected from vampires in a tent, but they do attract Blair witches, so you have to be very careful about that.
Damn it. Okay, I'm never going camping in Transylvania. It just seems like a whole lot of bad situations.
Oh my god. Well, this week the movie machine has made us watch Vampire in Brooklyn from 1995. Truman, how do ancient scrolls describe this film?
Well, let me just blow some dust off it here. Whew. Caribbean vampire Maximillian, played by Eddie Murphy, is the last of his kind, so he sets sail for New York City to seek out a half-vampire woman who's rumored to live in Brooklyn. After crashing his boat into the docks, Maximillian saves small-time bookie Julius Jones, played by Kadeem Hardison, from a pair of gangsters, and transforms him into a ghoul to assist him in his search. Maximillian and Julius soon discover that the half-vampire he seeks is Rita Veder, played by Angela Bassett, an NYPD detective investigating the boat crash who does not know that she's a half-vampire. To turn her into a full vampire, Maximillian must convince Rita to dance with him one time. But this turns out to be trickier than he expected thanks to Julius's bumbling attempts to help. To gain her trust, Maximillian must disguise himself as Rita's preacher and a fast-talking Italian street tough, all while Rita slowly falls in love with her partner, Detective Justice, played by Alan Payne, and while Julius's body slowly rots and falls apart, much to the amusement of his uncle Silas, played by John Witherspoon. Now, Landon.
Yes.
You're an Italian.
That I am.
Let's talk about the microaggressions, or shall we say macroaggressions, committed on your people by this here film. How do they compare to the macroaggressions committed by me, your co-host, on this here podcast?
Well, you know what's funny is I just watched. I realize I am 20 years behind the ball on this one, but I just started watching The Sopranos, and there is an episode in season 1 that's all about different representations of Italians in movies and TV.
Yes. Get ready for more of those. As a big-time Sopranos fan, you're going to hear a lot of discussion about Italian-American representation.
Okay, so Eddie Murphy plays an Italian person. Is that what you're referring to? I mean, we could talk about that, or we could just talk about the Italian people in this movie.
It's a pretty big pizza pie of Italian representations with a number of different toppings.
Listen, you've got your Italian restaurant. Mm-hmm. You've got your mafia.
Yes.
you've got your slight/overt racism coming out of their mouths.
Eddie Murphy makes a scene in an Italian restaurant. Personally, as a Billy Joel fan, I was in heaven.
He definitely asks for some red wine. I guess that was what mood he was in that night.
Yeah, exactly. Well, really, it was about what mood Angela Bassett was in that night. How else could he have known? How else could Eddie Murphy have figured out that she liked red wine other than transforming into an Italian, holding her up at gunpoint, and asking what her favorite type of wine is?
We're going to return to that. I just wanted to reiterate some of the cast and crew of this before we get into the convo. This was, okay, buckle up for a second for the writers as I go through this.
Okay.
Your seatbelt sounded like you were breaking pencils.
I'm sorry, that's the dropsies again. The seatbelt went right into my pelvis and shattered my hip bone. I'm going to get it checked out. It's probably fine.
Okay, this movie was written based on a story by Eddie Murphy, his brother Charlie Murphy, and from what I understand, their stepfather Vernon Lynch.
Must have been a bonding experience for the whole family.
From that story, Charlie Murphy wrote the screenplay, and then Michael Lucker and Chris Parker came in to basically write the shooting script.
Yes, brought in by the studio.
This was directed by Wes Craven, who needs no introduction. Are
you a fan of his? Do you like movies that guy made?
Well, we will get to where this falls in his career in just a little bit, but this stars Eddie Murphy, Angela Bassett, Alan Payne, Kadeem Harrison, and John Witherspoon. We're going to talk a little bit about Kadeem Harrison later in this episode.
We should talk a lot about Kadeem Harrison in this movie, frankly. And I should get his name right when I say it. Hardison.
Dwayne Wayne himself. Because there is a connection from this movie to another movie that came out before it called Death by Temptation. Ooh. And we're going to talk a lot about that.
That is getting killed by a vampire, kind of, is Death by Temptation, wouldn't you say?
It's Def, D-E-F.
Oh.
As in Def Jam.
Well, once again, Truman proving that he is not the right demographic for a lot of these things.
Truman, the whitest man in the world.
Yeah, well, I worked hard for that title.
Let's talk about some specs for this film. It was released on October 27th, 1995.
Ooh, the spookiest day of them all.
Released by Paramount. We're going to talk about Paramount and Eddie Murphy's relationship with them in a little bit as well. Do you want to guess how many theaters this came out in?
I'm gonna say 1900.
That is not correct.
That is not correct. Okay. Okay. Then my final guess would be 2200.
Okay, very close. And I think we'll give you the prize for that one. It's 2307.
Okay. I guess I should have bet bigger on this. Eddie Murphy was sort of famous. Wes Craven was sort of famous.
He was in a lull here. For just a split second before Nutty Professor comes out next year.
I acknowledge Eddie Murphy was in a rough patch in his career, but I also feel like when you get to a certain level of bigness, and like when you have been in, when you're the Beverly Hills Cop guy, even if the last Beverly Hills Cop movie sucked, you're still like, that your name is still a draw.
He's an icon, for sure.
Yes.
I mean, he was an icon before entering the 90s. So,
certainly.
He
was an icon when he was like 19 years old.
Yes.
So if you didn't compare this to Paul Hogan, who became an icon at 47 in roughly the same few years as Eddie Murphy.
It goes to show, no reason to compare yourself to anyone else. It can happen to anyone at any time.
Yeah, no one here in this conversation should feel bad about not getting famous in Hollywood at a specific time when they maybe base their whole personality on planning for that to happen.
This movie debuts at number 3, which is indicative of where Eddie Murphy's star power was at the time. Just to give you a quick litmus for the pop culture moment after this movie was released and did number 3 at the box office. This is what prompted David Spade to make his controversial joke on the Hollywood Minute during Weekend Update, where he came. I don't know if you know that segment.
No.
If people who aren't familiar, David Spade had this thing called the Hollywood Minute on Weekend Update, where he would give color commentary to pop culture people and things of the time,
kind of like a podcast, really.
Kind of, but in 1 minute, something that we can't do.
Oh, no. So better than a podcast, really.
He had, so Eddie Murphy obviously being an SNL, alumni and like the maybe most important person to save the show when it potentially was going to get canceled in its 6th year. And a image of Eddie Murphy pops up, kind of newscaster style next to him at the news desk, and he goes, "Look, kids, a falling star." And Eddie Murphy was not happy about that.
I don't even think that's like the sickest of burns. I'm mainly reacting this way knowing Eddie Murphy's whole deal, and oh boy.
Yeah. It did not land well. There's plenty of things you can go listen to David Spade talk about the years of Eddie Murphy giving him the cold shoulder and other things. But I just felt like a cultural moment to kind of explain where we are with Eddie Murphy and Vampire from Brooklyn in 1995.
Yes. I think you said Vampire of Brooklyn, which has me thinking of Werewolves of London, and it also has me thinking about how the title for this movie is just really, really simple. It just really gives you, it's right across the plate, gives you exactly what you're going to get.
I also have notes on that, which we'll get to in a bit. Let's talk a little bit about, since this comes in at number 3, the top 5 in the box office of October 27th, 1995, time and place. Let's find it. Number 1, in its 2nd week, Get Shorty.
Oh, Get Shorty. Got
a movie I wish I liked more.
I guess I should see that again. I remember in my youth being like, oh yeah, if I can't find Pulp Fiction to watch, I'll watch Get Shorty, the kind of like basic cable above ground swimming pool Pulp Fiction.
Number 2 in its first week. Again, this is indicative of where Eddie Murphy is. The movie Powder. the powder with the albino-looking kid with the special powers, starring Jeff Goldblum. Drama. It is a movie from my childhood for sure. It might be one that the machine sends to us at some point.
Yeah, I mean, you get 2 from the same week, and neither of them though is number 4. So what's number 4?
Okay, Vampire in Brooklyn coming in at number 3 in its first week. Number 4, the Sigourney Weaver serial killer movie Copycat.
Copycat. I don't remember that movie. Wow.
Oh, Harry Connick Jr.
But again, this is a movie from the mid-90s. Lest we forget, I am younger. Despite the dropsies making me look quite a lot older right now. Okay. So Copycat number 4.
That's also in its first week, and then rounding out the top 5, Now and Then in its third week.
Now and Then.
That was like a group of girls, and younger, and then them as women, older. Rosie O'Donnell, Christina Ricci. Others, Alyssa Milano might be in it.
The great thing about a title like Now and Then is that the movie can really be anything. Like you could have told me that it was like a time travel cop movie, like basically Time Cop, and I would have also bought that. I would also buy that as a horror movie.
Yeah, I would watch that as a sci-fi cop. I would watch that as Time Cop. I would watch Time Cop. Let's go watch Time Cop.
Let's go watch Time Cop, a movie that people remember.
All right, let's finish out some of these specs. Vampire in Brooklyn, despite a poor box office showing, which we'll get to in a second, had 14 weeks in the theaters. Drops off the top 10 in its fourth week. On a $14 million budget, it does make domestically $19.7 million.
Huh?
From what I could see, again, I've checked multiple resources and could not find any international box office for this.
Did you go to the library basement and look at the microfiche though? Did you Silence of the Lambs that shit?
I
Get
did.
It up on the projector.
I've got a runny nose now from all the dust I inhaled. And so this comes in at a total box office of $19.7 million. Not great on a $14 million budget when you got marketing to contend for.
Yeah,
it's no Pluto Nash, but
isn't that's the real tragedy of Eddie Murphy is that he could be in a movie like this that tanked pretty hard, and it is possibly part of the reason it's forgotten is because it is far from the biggest flop that he made. Like he's reached new heights in movies that failed.
Since people do not forget Pluto Nash, even though no one has seen it. Of that movie's $4 million box office take on a $100 million budget, I am one of the very few people who saw that in theaters.
Oh, God, you were trying to help your boy out, Landon. You're telling all your friends, let's get in there for Pluto Nash opening weekend. He'll bounce back. I feel like Vampire in Brooklyn crawled so Pluto Nash could lie there dead, basically.
Could plummet off the cliff that Samuel L. Jackson jumps off of.
Yes, it could sink into the ground or into a pool of oil like in the house in Poltergeist.
Oh my God,
2015.
Okay, so we talked a little bit. You mentioned our age gap. This is 1995. You're a wee lad.
Yes.
What does your awareness of Vampire in Brooklyn look like when it comes out in the time since?
My parents took me to see it opening weekend, and they explained all the dirty jokes in it to me. They thought it was very important for me to...
Not that many dirty jokes in this, surprisingly.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, having sex with a woman so hard and then killing her that blood comes out of a keyhole, you could interpret that to be certain things. My mother leaned over to me and whispered to me that this might be an allegory for a cum shot, and I was like, oh, thank you very much for telling me that. No, I was not aware of this movie at all when it came out. I've heard reference to it as an adult in terms of it being one of Eddie Murphy's rockier patches and one of Wes Craven's rockier patches. But as listeners may know, I'm not super plugged into horror movies the way that maybe other people here are, so it's just not a movie that's really been on my radar at all, other than knowing that he was in it and knowing that it was reportedly not good.
Not the good.
Hey, kind of an Italian vampire when you think about it.
I was going for more Transylvanian than Italian there.
Well, I have one speed of European racism that I can go to, Landon, and it doesn't always work out for you.
Well, joining us for this episode is our third co-host, Bela. She is asleep in the corner right now and not offended at all by my Transylvanian accent.
Well, okay, well that's good to know. I mean, I'm sure if she were awake, maybe she would feel different. Wake her up, say it to her face. That's all I'm saying. Go on.
Okay. So this was a very pivotal movie for me.
Of course it was. Of course. Let's hear about it.
Is that the character I'm painting for myself on this show?
All I know is that your Letterboxd review of Ernest Scared Stupid is "This movie made me who I am." So yeah, it's
which
really,
is a true statement, not even ironic.
The brand is strong. Go on. How is it pivotal?
Okay. This came at a time when I was not into horror movies at all. I was a little scared boy, and by boy, I mean 14 years old.
It still counts as a boy, I think, a little bit.
This came on, I have the date, I looked this up, so in that microfiche I dusted it off and even looked up when the HBO premiere of this was. Which was almost 1 year to the date of its theatrical release. It was October 26, 1996, which means on the 1 year anniversary, October 27th, 1996, I saw this movie for the first time. Let me rephrase that. I saw parts of this movie for the first time between switching to another channel when I got too scared.
What's scary in this movie? Is anything
gore.
scary?
I can't. At the time, like death, anything where like the Kadeem Harrison who has the dropsies, like it grossed me out. I couldn't like wrap my head around like, oh my god, someone is like rotting and falling apart. I can't like cope with that.
That is kind of disturbing, and I'm saying it with a huge smile on my face because of how weird of a choice it is.
So there were two things. One was what I vividly remember at the time was Eddie Murphy's like intense vampire makeup at the end of this movie.
Yeah, it's very intense.
And Kadeem Harrison losing his eyeball and chasing it around on the floor and having someone step on it.
It's so fucked up. So I did not expect that.
Those two things really, like, you know, it was Eddie Murphy, which I was used to at this point. I'm like, oh, I like Eddie Murphy. And so I'm like, my parents were going out to dinner, maybe some work function or something, left me home alone. I had a pizza and I had full access to HBO. And so I was watching Vampire in Brooklyn that night.
So this was the formative pizza in a movie experience, not Don Juan DeMarco.
I mean, we could really trace it back. I have formative memories also of Back to the Future and pizza movies. I digress.
Arguably the best of the pizza movies we've talked about thus far.
There was a huge Pizza Hut promotion tie-in with Back to the Future. That's how you got the cool sunglasses. I still have them. Maybe I'll wear them in a future episode.
Stay tuned. It'll sound great.
So, not being into horror, but like watching Eddie Murphy in a horror comedy, like this kind of gave me my first little tastes of like pushing it in that direction.
Yeah.
Which would come to fruition the next year with watching Wes Craven's movie that came out in 1996 on VHS the following summer in 1997, which was Scream.
Yes, a movie that was a little bit successful.
We're going to return to that well in a minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think this movie was like it kind of helped nudge me a little bit toward like being kind of horror curious, and then the phenomenon that was Scream was like, okay, I got to check this out. I rented it from Blockbuster in the middle of summer, watched it in the middle of the day. The phone rang while watching it. Ooh. I shit my pants, and I've been hooked on horror ever since.
Now, Landon, was there a pizza in the middle of the day? What did you have for lunch?
Probably
with the
not.
Movie? No,
not at that time. Not 97. Because I couldn't drive yet, I don't think. Or maybe I could.
And how can you get a pizza at your house if you can't drive? The most famously immobile food.
when you are a 15-year-old who doesn't have a job, how do you pay for a pizza to be delivered to your house?
In the late 90s, pizza cost a nickel. We all know this to be true. None of that Bidenflation there. I will say, like, as someone who is skittish about horror movies even now, that being said, everyone go see Longlegs if it's still in theaters. This movie never felt scary to me. I think, like, even like the gore stuff, and I don't do great with gore, but him pulling the guy's heart out, or even the eye getting stepped on, or the dropsies, to me it all, like, I don't know, maybe it's just because it's kind of low budget enough, or it's 90s enough in its execution, and I, like, know how all the effects were done, that I can look at it from this technical viewpoint of, like, oh, cool! Oh, man, I bet man, corn syrup, that must have been fun. So yeah, I was able to look at it, at least now as an adult, with just sort of a good-natured sense of fun about the prosthetics and the visual effects work that went into it. And there's also not really, the biggest jump scare is like a pigeon. There's not really any other
that's right, yeah,
terribly frightening things. It feels like a Hammer horror movie, kind of.
Oh, which that is exactly my speed. I fucking love Hammer horror. The funny thing is, jump scares don't do much for me. Like, they're just annoying. I don't, like, I won't avoid a movie because they'll have jump scares in it. But if you're relying on jump scares without, like, a narrative reason for it, like, it's my least favorite thing about horror films.
Yeah, it's my least favorite thing too, because I just hate being startled, and I am, I'm frequently startled by normal things happening in the world. I don't need a movie to do that with a sound cue and a spooky clown face or something.
But the point I was going to make was, like, when I look back on this film with any favorable light that I do have, those effects are what, like, make me a little warm to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't think I've ever been less mad at a movie I didn't like. You want to talk about warmth for a movie? If you've watched BoJack Horseman, there's that character on it, Kelsey Jennings, the really mean director who is, like, mean to everybody around her, but whenever she sees BoJack's friend Todd, she just, like, treats him like a dog. She's just like, "Who's this guy? Who's this guy? Hey, let me give you a cookie. Here, come on, sit on my lap. I love you. I love this guy. Look at his little face." I feel that way about this movie.
I'm not sure how Eddie Murphy would feel about that, but who cares?
You know what? Yeah, who actually cares? I think Pluto Nash is doing okay. Shrek 5 in theaters next year.
Where do you want to start talking about this movie? Because I could jump in literally anywhere.
I want to start by just saying, despite my warm opinions about this movie just generally, I don't really know what to say or where to start, because it's like, watching the movie, I'm not sure what parts of this horror comedy are supposed to be comedy and what parts are supposed to be serious. There are a lot of things in this movie that like, in a vacuum you'd want to pull apart and scrutinize and be like, what the fuck is that? But it's also like, there's a lot of things about a clown that you can pull apart and scrutinize and be like, why are your shoes that big, you idiot? But it's like, well, because the clown is trying to be funny. So it's like, I don't know, like, how deep can I get on something like Julius's uncle sees his hand fall off and is just like, well, whatever. I guess he's got the dropsies. That's a thing that exists, and doesn't, like, call 911, because it's like, well, there's that. I don't know. This movie is so all over the place that it's hard for me to get a lock on it to target it.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good place to start then, which is the kind of chaotic nature of 5 different people making 5 different movies.
Mm-hmm. How many of those are the writers, and how, like let's list the 5 different people.
Okay, I think there is there's the Eddie Murphy of it all, or the Murphy of it all, because I think we need to include Charlie in that as well.
Yeah,
which is the original concept that they had, which was, I want to do a serious horror film. Maybe, according to some people, that's kind of what they maybe wanted to do, but then backtracked on that and said, no, I want to do the comedy of it.
Yeah.
So it already starts in a confusing place. Then you've got Wes Craven, who has not had a run of comedy yet. He's not really dipped his toe in that water. He's done some irreverent horror, like not super serious horror, but not anything in terms of like broad comedy.
Yeah.
And so he's coming at it from, I don't even know if he's coming at it from like a horror angle so much as I'm curious to get into comedy. How do I tell a joke? Horror and comedy are kind of cousins in a way, structurally,
Sure.
setting up a joke versus setting up a gag, a violent gag, a gore gag.
There's a form of catharsis that everybody and oftentimes after a big scare in the theater, everyone kind of laughs nervously.
Yes, absolutely.
I know. I even though I don't like horror movies, I've seen a couple scary trailers and seen how the audience reacts.
So I think, like, just like Eddie Murphy's like, no, I want to do a serious film, and then later is like, no, I want to do the comedy. I feel like Wes Craven's like, yeah, I'm curious to do a comedy, then feels untethered and go, well, I'm just going to do it like a horror movie.
Yeah.
And so you've already got those two kind of inverse things being polarized in like opposite directions in two different ways already.
Yes. It is Eddie Murphy trying to get outside of his wheelhouse by not doing a comedy, and it's Wes Craven trying to get outside of his wheelhouse by doing a comedy, and neither one of them is really, like, they're both evenly matched in terms of power and clout, and also Wes Craven has Paramount behind him that reportedly wanted this to kind of be, what if Beverly Hills Cop was vampire?
Yeah.
And
that's the other party here, which is the studio going, we want to make an Eddie Murphy movie.
Yeah. I feel like this movie, I've read that mountain ranges are formed by massive tectonic plates just grinding against each other, and the terrain above them folds and mounted up. So the mountain range of this movie is just produced by the grinding of Eddie Murphy's ego against Paramount Pictures and Wes Craven.
It's fitting, considering the Paramount Pictures logo is a mountain range.
Did that just blow everybody's mind right there?
And then I think, to a lesser degree, you have the writers of the screenplay that have come in.
The least powerful ones.
Yes. They came in through Wes Craven to write this movie based on the treatments and previous script by Charlie Murphy. And I think they were a bit confused as far as, like, is this a comedy? Is this a horror? Let's just do what seems to make sense to address all of the notes from everyone we're getting. My God, I feel so sorry for them.
God, these two, reading them talk about their experience in the oral history of this movie that you can find on the Wayback Machine. They were both in their 20s, and they'd both kind of just done this. It's like every story about screenwriters in the 90s is like, yeah, I wanted to be a screenwriter, so I quit my job and moved to LA, and 2 weeks later Paramount called and had me write an Eddie Murphy movie. It just came together for them. But
never did I relate more to them. Like, two guys, one's that's in the horror, one that's in the comedy, to get their big break to do an Eddie Murphy horror vehicle. Like, to me, that sounds like something we could have easily fallen into early in our LA days, and like the nightmare that would ensue from that. I'm surprised they're still friends.
I know. Well, I mean, it seems like this was a hell of a ride because I think that if something like this happened today, it would just be an endless series of pitch meetings with like assistants where we get contradictory notes and spend hours and hours trying to implement them. Whereas with this, it's like They got the call to do it. They pitched their version to Wes Craven on a Wednesday. He loved it and said, pitch this to the VP at Paramount. So on Thursday, they pitched it to the VP. Then Friday, they pitched to the president of Paramount. And then the president of Paramount is like, hey, get on a plane, go to New York, pitch this idea to Eddie Murphy. Like, they got to... They were ushered into the halls of power immediately to write this bad movie.
That is a whirlwind for sure. And so, listen, okay, let's just talk real quick about Eddie Murphy.
Yes.
In fact, I'll talk a little bit about where this falls in his career to a degree, but there's something I want to emphasize here, which is, okay, first and foremost, he's an icon. We already talked about that. Beverly Hills Cop, stand-up, Saturday Night Live, Coming to America, Trading Places. Like, he's huge in the 80s. Like, there's no one bigger except maybe Rocky, a fictional character.
What about Alf?
In the 80s.
Alf was big, too.
Not Eddie Murphy level.
I don't know, man.
Elf eats cats. Eddie Murphy eats elves.
Eddie Murphy shoots cats in this movie.
Oh my God! Oh, Bela, I'm sorry I closed your eyes for that one.
This movie goes so hard in animal killing.
The dog at the beginning of this was a shock.
Well, it was probably a shock to that dog too when it got launched into the ocean and seemingly died.
Okay. Eddie Murphy was in a bit of a funk when this movie came out.
Yes.
And was being developed. He began the 90s kind of strong with a huge ego. Boomerang was a gigantic hit. And then he immediately followed up with the bomb of Distinguished Gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
This probably led him to go, okay, I will agree to do Beverly Hills Cop 3, which turned a profit, but not nearly as much as Beverly Hills Cop 1 and 2.
Yes.
And it's, not a great film, and you can feel it's like, okay, I'm just like clutching at your pocketbooks here.
Yeah. Please help me just like pay my mortgage. Come on. We had a good time the first 2 times, didn't we?
So, like, that's 1990 to, like, 1993, which is when Beverly Hills Cop 3 comes out. In development on a number of things, he does this film, and it's not great at all. And he says at one point that the oral history is like, no one can really tell what's real, what's not. So, like any oral history, you place your chips on who you believe.
No, we will trust the screenwriters because you can always trust screenwriters. The best among us.
But to their knowledge, they even, say, we have no way of verifying this, but Eddie Murphy has claimed that he was only doing this film so that he could get the Nutty Professor, the rights to do the Nutty Professor.
He had a deal for a certain number of movies at Paramount. He had one left, and it was just like, okay, let's get this knocked out.
Now, that brings me to, like, where Eddie Murphy is mentally entering into this picture.
Ooh,
and why I can see the kind of messiness of this, where, anything that takes as long as it does in Hollywood, your enthusiasm for projects changes as the movie itself changes.
Yeah.
I can easily see a scenario where he's like, cool, my comedies are not doing well. I don't like that. I have a huge ego, and this is not feeding it very well. Let me pivot a little bit. Let's do something a little challenging, a little risky. And they come up with the idea for Vampire in Brooklyn, a serious horror film that is going to poise him as a powerful yet dramatic villain.
Yes.
He's never played a villain before. And that is how you get the initial story for it.
Yeah, but this is something, this is something he wants to do, and it's something that he and his brother and his stepdad kind of workshop into treatments and maybe a script that needs work.
Yeah. So then, once he's maybe negotiating with Paramount about the Nutty Professor, suddenly this Vampire in Brooklyn idea becomes like greenlit, and he's like, well, what I really want to do is Nutty Professor, and now you're saying you want a comedy out of this. I didn't want this initially as a comedy, blah, blah, blah. You can kind of see how someone's mentality of like, okay, let's just fucking wrap this thing up. I said I'd do it. I can't break the contract. I'm going to be an asshole on this thing. I'm not saying there's an excuse for it.
No.
But, like, I can understand how you get to the place of this thing I once cared about, I don't give a shit about. I'm going to fall back on the easy choices of doing the comedy rather than the horror. And I'm gonna jet out in my car before the rap party starts.
Yes, a true fact from the research. I mean, that's what's so curious though, because in this movie, I mean, Eddie Murphy is playing it completely straight in this film. In his role as Maximillian the vampire, he is. In his other roles, he's being more zany and over the top. But he is doing a real, genuine, dramatic performance that it seems like he really cares about, and it seems like it's important to him delivering these kind of sweeping Shakespearean-style monologues, or like getting angry at Kadeem Hardison and throwing him around the room, and like he's trying to be frightening and imposing and seductive in a genuine way. And
he's good at it in a weird way.
He's good. Yeah, like Eddie Murphy has a lot of range as an actor, and you see that even in, you see that in Beverly Hills Cop, in Trading Places, in Coming to America. Like, he does big, funny stuff in those movies, but also in the next scene, he'll be doing something really heartfelt and very genuine, and he can pull it all off, and part of, I think, what makes it work is that you can buy the character he's playing, and then it makes it all the more authentic when he's going completely nuts. Part of this performance seems to be, yes, he is trying to spite the studio that wants to make a comedy and being like, no, fuck you, I want this to be a drama. But also, it seems like he genuinely buys what he's doing. This is not a half-assed performance. This is not Marlon Brando and Don Juan DeMarco. This is a guy who, even if it took him 10 hours to leave his trailer, which is a thing that apparently happened, when he shows up, what we've got on camera is a guy who is trying to do a good job in a dramatic performance.
Yeah, okay. I've been watching a lot of A&E WWE biographies.
Great.
You ready to go here with me?
Yeah, no, I'm ready, man. That's it's good. It's good to nourish your your cultural side, arts and entertainment.
One thing that I watched a lot of WWE during the superhero era growing up, and I have a lot of interest in learning the behind the scenes stuff that I didn't know as a child, and so one thing that never occurred to me about the wrestlers that hold the championship belt is they'll hold on to it for, an extended period of time, but they're essentially holding up the entire organization on their back while they hold that belt. They're setting the tone. They are, setting up the matches that other wrestlers are building to. Can I get a title match? Can I not get a title match? And, because it's scripted to a degree, there's how are we going to balance this character versus, the Shawn Michaels character or the Bret Hart character, yada, yada, yada. I just learned that, and it just was it was a revelation to me to go, oh, that's why you get eras of wrestling. And I think the same kind of holds true when you get superstars like Eddie Murphy. It's there's got, again, no excuse for being an asshole and unprofessional, but the amount of pressure that other people cannot, by sheer virtue of not being a superstar, cannot comprehend, that rides on your back for so many jobs on a production. And not just this production, but the next production. And bringing in money to a studio. I can't imagine that amount of pressure.
No, certainly. And I mean, also just your entire public image and ego being on the line, too. I mean, the fact that it's there's already a narrative emerging about Eddie Murphy that, oh, he used to be good and now he sucks. Well, no one. The human condition is wanting to believe that your best days are still ahead of you and that you're not getting worse. So, I mean, that's got to be big. And then, as someone who's made a bunch of movies and knows what a good movie feels like when you're making it versus a bad movie, I'm sure Eddie Murphy's looking at this and well, the director and the studio want this to be a comedy that I don't want to make, and I'm trying to make it a drama. Even if he can't admit it to himself, he probably knows this isn't gonna go well, and he's seeing a pattern emerging.
There's got to be a point at which you, being as experienced as he is by this film, can start to see the writing on the wall. I mean, as much of an icon as he is, he did have movies that did not do well. His experience doing Harlem Nights with Richard Pryor was very different than what he had experienced in many of his other movies. Where you get two gigantic egos and someone he looked up to, and just it not playing out how he thought, and a clash of egos, and okay, this project is not what I thought it would be when I set out to do it. Yeah.
Okay, so, well, look, we talked about some of Eddie Murphy's earlier career. If I may lunge for the controls of this boat as it careens towards Brooklyn Harbor.
Yes.
So I after watching this movie, I realized I'd never seen Coming to America the whole way through. I've just seen bits and pieces.
Ooh, really?
So I watched Coming to America.
Okay.
Hot take, better movie than this one.
Slightly.
Another hot take, Vampire in Brooklyn
R.I.P.
is...
James Earl Jones.
R.I.P. Yes, pour one out for the king, both in the movie and in real life.
And in Lion King.
Anyway, and the king of introducing CNN. The Vampire in Brooklyn is a remake of Coming to America, but bad.
I had the same thought of, like, how many times has Eddie Murphy played a character coming to America? Period. Full stop. Question mark. I guess.
Well, at least 3 if you count the Coming to America sequel. This is a movie where Eddie Murphy plays multiple roles in a movie about a foreigner who comes to New York City to find a woman who he must impress while hiding the truth of his background from her. He's got a bumbling, wisecracking friend who's trying to assist him. He lives in a shitty apartment which gets magically transformed into a big, beautiful apartment, or surprisingly transformed midway through the movie. It's not magical in Coming to America. He's got a cranky landlord who changes his tune the second he realizes that Eddie Murphy is rich. There's an over-the-top black preacher character who's played in a dual role. Eddie Murphy plays a white person in a dual role.
Is that Arsenio?
It's Arsenio plays
it's been a while
the
since I've
preacher
seen
in the
it,
movie.
yeah.
Let me tell you also something. As someone who's not super familiar with Arsenio Hall, or who mainly knows him as a talk show host, Arsenio Hall in Coming to America might be one of the best looking men I have ever seen in my life. He is he is just so handsome in that movie. I am blown away at how
we have watched Alexander Skarsgård as Tarzan on this show.
I mean, look, I'm sorry. Listen, all I can say about that is just hoo. But yeah, and also, I'm sorry, more comparisons. Coming to America, the love interest, her roommate, her sister, is very horny and sexually aggressive and tries to get in the middle of her love situation with Eddie Murphy. That also happens. Angela Bassett's roommate is aggressively, insanely horny and tries to, get in the middle of her thing. And both movies also rely a lot on comic interludes where old black men have loud, profane arguments with each other. So it really feels like at some point in the writing process, somebody just decided, let's just fall back on the formula of a very successful Eddie Murphy movie.
This movie is basically a cross between Coming to America and Death by Temptation that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
A kind of underground film that isn't about a vampire. It is about a succubus. And
I mean, a sexy monster.
Not necessarily in Brooklyn, but just in a bureau of New York, unnamed. That movie stars Samuel L. Jackson as well.
Who was also in Coming to America.
In terms of the vibe, the like cinematography, the kills, the general story structure of the vampire character, kind of not being the through line, but being the person that pops up every so often. You see the seductions, you see the kills, but then we're following another character who's kind of like trying to locate her and take her down. There are like almost shot for shot kill reenactments from that film to this film, and it stars Kadeem Harrison, who by the end of Death by Temptation is turned into a vampire and is driving a limo.
Okay. It feels like all over the place, like everybody running shit in this movie was so put off balance by all the conflict that they just kind of fell back on better movies that they or other people had been involved with in the past. Like, just the safety net of this movie was a bunch of other better movies.
The last bit of trivia for Death by Temptation is it was made in 1990, but released in 1997 in Sweden as a sequel to Vampire in Brooklyn.
Really? Well, then how do they deal with the fact that Kadeem Hardison becomes a vampire at the end of this movie, and then in that movie he's not a vampire, and then becomes a vampire at the end of the movie again?
In other countries, I don't think they care as much. How do you go from Dawn of the Dead to Zombie 2 by Lucio Fulci, which have zero connective tissue at all? I don't know, but they do.
Are you trying to suggest that Swedish people are dumb and can't understand what sequels are? Are you trying to take a shot at Scandinavian people after everything I've said about Italians? Is this what this is?
What's a good hand gesture I can do?
Look, the Swedes
That
don't
was
really.
my Swedish chef arms.
Yeah, okay, that's the one. Just flopping your hands around and throwing bowls and everything. Bork, bork, bork. Wow, they yelled that at my people when they got off the boat at Ellis Island, and it was extra hurtful because the boat was from Finland.
Did you arrive in as vampires in Portland?
In Portland. Yes. Yeah, no, I'm trying to think what Finnish animal were we transformed into on the boat that then jumped off? Is it like a seal or something like that then the
Something
shadow
with blubber, yeah.
Yeah. So I was upset in this movie. I got a fake out when like the boat crashes into the harbor and Silas and Julius are both starting to investigate, and this pigeon jump scare comes out and this pigeon is flapping around. And I'm pointing at the screen hooting and hollering, going like, that's the vampire in Brooklyn. He doesn't turn into a bat, he turns into a pigeon, an urban area bird. Yes, very clever. But no, the pigeon was just a pigeon for pigeon's sake, and actually the vampire in Brooklyn turns into a wolf.
Yes.
Which is a different monsters thing.
It gets into some weird lore stuff with vampirism in this film. So, okay, here, I love this opening scene at the harbor, but I think we should start with talking about Eddie Murphy's VO over the credits.
Yes,
because
of
it
course.
sets up his through line for this movie.
Yeah,
and it plays into something I want to say about being a wolf.
Okay,
so
there are two of them inside you.
Eddie Murphy gives us some like expository VO setting up his character in this film, which is essentially he comes from a race of vampires that were driven from Egypt. One sect of these vampires went to Transylvania. Another sect that he was part of, one with better taste, went to an island in Bermuda, or an island in the Atlantic that exists within the Bermuda Triangle. And they fed on weary travelers that got shipwrecked.
And when he says that, like, this is just over credits and a black screen, and when he is doing this voiceover and he says, other vampires who had much better taste went here, and my initial reaction was to laugh at that and be like, yeah, he's taking a shot at Dracula. But now recognizing then as the movie goes on that he's playing the whole thing straight, it's like, oh, this is just kind of a flourish of character, which I mean, which also works. It's just you come into this movie and right away you're thinking like, oh, am I supposed to be laughing at this?
Right. Well, I mean, listen, he's also, as we talk about in almost every episode, setting up a more interesting movie to me, which is like, I can picture Eddie Murphy in Brooklyn. Like, that's not hard for me to do. I want to see this island of vampires. Like, we've seen It's Alive 3, Isle of Alive. Give me that, but with vampires.
I mean, yeah, what he lays out in the opening voiceover, we were driven out of Egypt. Some of us went to Transylvania. Me and my buds went to the Caribbean. We were feasting on people there until hunters arrived and killed all of us, and I'm the last one to make it out. I'm like, listening to this, I'm like, well, that sounds like an entire awesome movie that you just described to me and spoiled the ending of.
But he goes on to say that... he quotes himself, I guess, by saying, "A vampire alone is a vampire doomed." So he set out to look for the one known offspring that had been born in a foreign land, Brooklyn.
I think that maybe Maximillian should just learn to sit with himself and be alone with his thoughts and not really depend on the validation of other people. Go to therapy, Maximillian?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. Men would rather travel across the country, across the globe, to a bureau they've never been to, just to seek out one person instead of going to therapy.
I also have to just point out it is actually borough and not bureau. That suggests that New York is situated in several large pieces of furniture, and the one for Staten Island has all your smelly socks in it.
I thought the 5 bureaus of New York were all part of the government. You're saying that they're not different branches of executive, judicial?
Yeah, exactly. It's the separation of powers. There's the Manhattan branch, the Brooklyn branch, the Queens branch. Yeah.
The gangs of New York was just like the story of the American government coming together and dividing up the different 5 boroughs of New York.
Yes, exactly. A big part of it was everybody wearing color-coordinated clothing and marching around dramatically while flute music plays.
Okay, so I wanted to get that little VO out and circle back to this opening with the wolf on the boat.
Yes.
So on the one hand, this is very much a nod to Dracula, where there's the famous missing chapter of the book, which is what happens on the ship when he's being transported from Transylvania to England.
Yeah.
And in the book, in most of the adaptations of Dracula, this horrific thing happens on the boat where Dracula is being shipped in his coffin of dirt below decks, gets hungry. Renfield kind of sets it up so that he can eat the ship, and then the ship comes into port. They don't talk. No one ever addresses how the ship actually gets to its destination with not a single crew member alive. But
yeah, it's those self-driving ships that they have. Elon Musk has been innovating for a long time.
Anyway, so it's a nod to that, and I think a pretty effective one too. There's a sufficient amount of dead bodies.
Yeah,
on the ship.
I trust that he killed all those dudes. If I were a sailor, I would simply not put coffins on my boat.
Also, a very, very good touch to open your movie with gigantic set pieces of a boat crashing through yachts and into a I don't know, watchtower, wherever the fuck they are.
It's like a pier. Like his uncle Silas.
Why are they there?
But he's both a landlord and also like the night watchman at the completely decrepit and seemingly abandoned Brooklyn pier. It's very impressive. Like, the movie starts on page 1. This boat is just sailing through the harbor, smashing into everything. And then it crashes into the room that they're in, and rather than like call 911 or anything, it's just Silas climbs up on the boat and looks around, and Julius makes up an excuse about having to leave because dealing with spooky boats isn't in his job description.
I mean, fucking smart.
I would too. Nothing good is gonna come of this crashed boat. What I also read, though, is that Eddie Murphy, like, we don't see Eddie Murphy on this boat at all. We just see the boat sailing in and crashing. Apparently, like, they set this whole thing up and were ready to shoot. Like, they were filming this in Long Beach, even though it looks like New York. And I guess he was supposed to be on the boat for some of these shots, but then they get the call, like, they're all ready, it's lit, it's everything, and they're like, okay, we're ready to go, and they get a call. It's like, oh, Eddie Murphy is still at his house in Beverly Hills. It's going to take him 2 hours to drive to Long Beach and 2 hours in makeup to be ready to shoot. So they're just like, okay, I guess he won't be in this shot.
Which is stupid, because, like, he gets an okay entrance in the next scene, but, like, what better entrance to, like, have this massive ship bust through these yachts, go through the wall, and then have someone, like, investigating, seeing all these dead bodies, and then, like, from the dead bodies and all this destruction, your character just, like, emerges from the shadows. Like, my God, that would have been awesome, and I'm surprised that he wouldn't want to be part of that. What we get instead is a wolf.
Yes.
Now,
yes. Not a wolf of Wall Street. A wolf of whatever street in Brooklyn this is.
This is so okay. Going into vampire lore, this is so, like, a little confusing. A wolf is traditionally something that a vampire can turn into or have control over.
Oh.
But what I find interesting is the kind of nature of travel that these vampires have done over the centuries. They started in Egypt, went to the Caribbean, and some of them went to Transylvania.
Yeah.
What we associate with the wolf transformations are the ones from Transylvania, the traditional, Eastern European folk stories.
Yeah.
So the two questions that come to mind is, like, is that a chosen form, or is that intrinsic to the vampire, the vampire being, the DNA, what they're, they can select 3 forms, like a druid, that they can turn into in battle.
Yeah,
Wolf is one of them.
Yeah, he has to grind for a bit to get to level 4, but then he can pick more different options.
Yeah. Or is it based on conditions and like circumstance? By being in the Caribbean, could he have theoretically turned into, like, I don't know, a bird of paradise?
Yeah, or like a fish. Can he turn into like a clownfish or something? That might be useful if you're trying to, get to someone who's snorkeling. I don't know what use the wolf is. Like, did he learn the wolf thing in the Caribbean, where I don't assume there are a whole lot of wolves?
That's what I mean. Is like there's something that doesn't make sense. And if you travel further back in what they've set up here, is like, well, then if it's intrinsic to the vampire, then you have to say that they're intrinsic to Egypt.
Yes.
Which is also not a place that you find a lot of wolves.
Yeah, no, you should turn into a camel instead, or something like that. I do appreciate that this movie is like trying to weave kind of Caribbean culture into vampire lore. I think that's really neat. The vampire hunter they talk to eventually is also from the Caribbean, and like a lot of just the iconography and everything around that is rooted more in the cultural traditions of the Caribbean than of Eastern Europe, and I think that's neat.
He comes from previous Wes Craven film, The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Oh, like same. Now, you mean he's playing the same characters in The Serpent and the Rainbow, creating a
no,
cinematic universe?
No, not the same character, but definitely like the same flavor of I don't know. I don't want to call it voodoo. That's probably what it was at the time, but Serpent and the Rainbow was made, but that's kind of where they're playing it. The actor's name is Zakes Mokay. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but he's playing is he a doctor in this film?
Yeah,
Dr. Zako?
Yeah, he's a doctor who inexplicably works at a nightclub. Like he's a doctor of Caribbean vampires, but yeah, there's a nightclub with a live band playing a kickin' cover of Superstitious, and does not seem to be affecting his ability to work with old books and vampire languages.
That's, again, another movie I want to see, is someone writing their thesis on vampire lore from the back room of a nightclub. I
mean, honestly, if anybody is going to be owning a nightclub, it seems like it would be a vampire thing to do, really.
Ooh, well, I mean, they get into that in the Blade a little bit.
Yeah, and like I think the next to last season of What We Do in the Shadows also
there
did
you
the
go.
same thing.
Yes, I forgot about that.
What We Do in the Shadows, which is basically Vampire in Staten Island, and again is any given episode of that show is much better than this movie.
Okay, I want to before we leave this opening scene, I just want to take a second to talk about John Witherspoon. I'm not going to go into his career or anything, but let's hold him up on our shoulders and celebrate him, because he fucking rocks. He is so funny. He's one of the best parts of Friday. He's just like, I can see him being divisive for some people, but he has a line right at the beginning here where he's climbed onto this boat that's just crashed through the wall, and he's just like, "Ahoy, motherfucker!" And I just want to start greeting people that way from now on.
No, I completely agree. He said in one of the interviews that I read, like they're talking to a bunch of people involved with the movie, and John Witherspoon saying like, I know what people say about the movie. I had a great time making it. I just got to yell and be loud and abrasive and over the top the entire time. He is how little he cares that his nephew has bits of his body falling off of him. I'm going to come back to it again and again. Like, as soon as he sees his hand fall off and just like, "You've got the dropsies," I was like, oh, I'm watching a specific kind of movie, and I'm yes. on board.
So then let's go into the actual introduction of Eddie Murphy, and then let's bounce around a little bit. So
yeah. So
as you said, Julius runs off.
Yes.
He is a bookie, right?
Yeah, small time
crook to a degree. He owes some organized crime folk some money.
Yes.
They find him in an alleyway and are about to like do a little mafia to him.
Is that what your people call it? Here in the States, we say they're about to murder him with a gun. They have a gun.
The gun is just for threatening. They need their money first and foremost. So like if they scare him enough, you gotta break his knees a little bit. If they kill him, they're never gonna get their money. So they gotta just send a message here.
Okay, this is fair. Thank you for giving that unique cultural perspective on it. I do love when they're being threatened by the gangsters. The one of the hype man basically has him held up, and then the other one, we get him dramatically walking out of the car. We see him from behind with his gun held up. And then when he turns around to face Kadeem, on the soundtrack, we just get kind of a whoosh sound, and it's like it's part of the high camp presentation of everything in this movie that makes it a real joy to watch.
Anyway, they're about to do a mafia on Julius, and in the middle of that, from the all of the fog that emanates from the alleyways of Brooklyn, emerges Eddie Murphy, saying a line. Do you have the line? I don't have the line.
I don't have the line. It's something about how they're not going to kill him in a clean way, or how a clean kill is such a rare thing. Eddie Murphy in this long black coat with red lining, the fit is incredible, and okay.
And the hair, the wig, the hair.
Landon,
is this a watershed moment for us?
I just didn't really clock anything weird about his hair at all. Get
out of town.
I don't know. It's like he's a fucking vampire, okay? He looks weird. I don't know. It's a real problem, the wig blindness.
Wait.
Dropsies and wig blindness, the two afflictions battling it out.
How did you square the gigantic ridge around his entire forehead and temples where the wig was glued onto his head for the whole movie?
I don't know, man. Vampires look weird, right? They're like all spooky and stuff. A man's face is deteriorating and bits are dropping off his body. Like, I'm not gonna suddenly scrutinize.
And yet you don't clock that as real.
Well, I don't know. I thought it was just like a vampire effect. I didn't realize it was part of the wig being held on.
Not only is this a wig, this is the most terrible wig.
Eddie Murphy.
Like, they almost make no effort to hide the seams at where it's touching his head.
Eddie Murphy personally blames this wig for the failure of the movie. I think there are a lot of other things you could blame before this wig.
Yes.
It just didn't, I don't know, when I watched the movie a second time, having read all the wig content about it, and I was looking for it, I was like, okay, yeah, I guess that's bad, but I don't know, man. Maybe instead of mocking me and pointing fingers, we could all just sort of marvel at this particular type of brain damage I have where wigs just don't really register.
I mean, look, why can't I have it both ways? I cherish and appreciate every little detail about you, including your wig blindness, but also it's astonishing that you have wig blindness that severe.
It's you know what? Look, it's every day is a struggle. Going to drag shows is very difficult for me. I get very confused. But he also periodically yellow contact lenses in his wide and unblinking eyes. But yeah, he comes up. The mob guys shoot him a bunch, and he falls backwards into the mist. And then he levitates right back up onto his feet, and the bullet holes all heal. And he goes on this little monologue about how he's been burned, and he's been stretched on a rack, and he's been stabbed and all these things, but he's never been shot before, and it was an interesting experience. Two things.
Yes.
One, that's impressive that he's never been shot. I mean, it's the 90s. He's a vampire. He's been around for a long time. You'd think,
and you have an entire civilization of vampires on an island that's been killed off by hunters. How do you not avoid bullets in that skirmish?
You'd think you'd get... I mean, I get it that you need to use a stake to actually kill him, but you'd think there'd be, a little bit of shooting in the Caribbean at some point. But then my second thing is just, how sad is it, though, that he has been in America for all of 10 minutes and immediately is the victim of gun violence, like right off the boat. Like, welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome. I mean, that's sad. I mean, he shrugs it off. But then he reaches into the guy's chest and pulls out his heart and says that next time you try to kill me, put a little heart into it. And
which okay, immediately okay. So can you pinpoint where the movie begins to fail in terms of its horror and comedy? Because I'm tracking it so far. Like at this point in the movie and watching it, I'm like, okay, I kind of get where this is. Like, you've got an intense, really well, developed special effects of dead bodies, like actually gruesome dead bodies on this boat, compared with John Witherspoon's cartoonish reaction to it. Yeah. You've got this kind of like caricature of a organized crime holdup thing happening in this alleyway. And you've got this overpowered, vampire that is, showing them up. Like, at this point in the film, I get like, oh, okay, I'm securely in horror comedy territory.
Yes,
it hasn't gone off the rails yet for me.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't for me either, because it's like seeing Eddie Murphy, just like him getting shot and then flipping back up, like his body completely rigid, like he's just been hoisted back onto his feet with his eyes super wide. Yeah, it's like, okay, that's a kind of funny thing. Him growling at the guy, like put a little heart into it, and like in the way that he rips the guy's heart out, it put me in mind of Dumb and Dumber when he's having the fantasy about fighting the guy in the restaurant. And like, okay, putting it in the doggy bag, whatever. Yeah, so and
the heart is like adequately gruesome, but Eddie Murphy delivers the one-liner, with adequate comedy. Like, it feels balanced enough here.
And also, like, a minute later, when he's talking to Kadeem, like, Kadeem says, "Oh, please don't eat me," or something, and he says, "Don't worry, I already had a little Italian," and he pulls, like, some guts out of his teeth. So yeah, it seems like this is where at least in these scenes, the premise of the movie and the kind of movie that Paramount seemed to want is closest to actually existing.
Yes, agreed. Do I want to go into? No, I'm going to hold on to it a little bit. Let's talk a little bit more about this movie before I get into some other horror comedies, and especially like horror noir comedies. We'll get into that in a minute, but I think we gotta like introduce Angela Bassett and just kind of talk about the general like different plot lines that are happening through this.
Angela Bassett in this movie, coming off of an Academy Award nomination, and Angela Bassett playing a thankless role. I use that term a lot, but like the character she's playing is very confusingly written. It makes no sense that she would be falling in love with this fucked up looking creepy vampire dude, or that she'd spontaneously get super angry that her partner is supposedly having sex with her roommate. But like, Angela Bassett is so good, and she just commits so fully to it that like it kind of works. She's great. And the fact that like this movie is basically a straightforward vampire drama where all of the other supporting characters besides Angela Bassett and Eddie Murphy are like in a like Showtime at the Apollo sketch comedy kind of thing. And Angela Bassett, like, Eddie Murphy exists hermetically sealed from all of that. Angela Bassett sort of has to straddle the two worlds, and the fact that she does it is she should have gotten an Academy Award simply for the effort she put into keeping the wheels on this film.
Let's go into her for a second. I mean, she's a queen, quite literally, in Black Panther movies, but just generally speaking in the current lexicon of slang, queen. She got her start in the mid-'80s with TV shows like Spencer for Hire, The Cosby Show, 227, 30-something, tons of TV movies. And this is only her 11th feature film.
Damn.
But man, her credits are something else. She's got Kindergarten Cop, Boys in the Hood, Critters 4. John Sayles' Passion Fish, Malcolm X. Right before, yeah.
Is passionfish related to rumblefish, or are they different? And
They are very different.
And also, is that a joke I've made before? Because as I say it, it seems like the sort of shit I would have said.
I think you're clean on that one being your first take, but
nice.
It's on the board, and we will track it from henceforth.
Great. Okay, everybody stay tuned for you to make it again in a future episode.
So she was in Malcolm X, and then right before this film, she does What's Love Got to Do with It, starring, again, just as indicative of her talent and her power on screen as Tina fucking Turner.
Oof.
Big shoes to fill, and she gets her first Oscar nomination for that. Should have won.
Yes.
In 1995, when this film is released, she does a Mario Van Peebles Black Panthers movie called Panthers with Kadeem Harrison.
Oh.
She is in Strange Days.
Oh.
Catherine Bigelow's Strange Days.
Love me some Strange Days.
She's in this film, and then she's in one of her most memorable movies ever, Waiting to Exhale. So, like, she is just killing it, and I am upset to a degree, and I'm pointing the finger firmly at myself of, like, I had no real interest in, this brand of movie when I was a teenager.
You weren't the demographic it was being targeted at. I mean, you can't beat yourself up for how movies were marketed.
I know, but I'm just pointing my finger to say, I'm as much a part of the problem as anyone else. But that it took us 35, 40 years to, like, really start to appreciate fucking Angela Bassett.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't get her second Oscar nomination until the movie Black Panther.
Yeah, and I mean, and was that really? I mean, she could have been nominated for a lot of other stuff before that.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So, she just is. She brings such vivaciousness. Is that the word?
Sure. I think she does. I don't really know what context you. I mean, like, she puts a lot of life into a role that is just a lot of stuff gets dumped onto this character to try and make the movie work that is clearly the result of just trying to implement notes or everything. And it's, this whole thing of, like, oh, he has to dance with her one time in order to turn her into a vampire. Okay. So there's all these different scenes where Angela Bassett is being asked to dance in circumstances where it wouldn't really make sense for her to dance, and she's playing it as kind of like she's about to go along with it and dance, but then decides not to dance. Which is ridiculous, but she makes it work.
I gotta jump in here with that, because you put that in your synopsis as well, and I flagged it as something to talk about. So let's just give a quick overview of her character's, like, plot line in this movie.
Okay.
In theory, she is, as Eddie said in the VO, she's the daughter of a vampire.
Yes.
She is not yet herself a vampire.
She doesn't know it. Yes.
She doesn't know it, but she has these nightmares, and she paints her nightmares, and her nightmares start to come true. She envisions her roommate Nikki being killed, crucified, which comes to pass when Eddie Murphy runs into her.
Yes.
She has a dream about Eddie Murphy and her kissing, and she paints that. And it's really coming to terms with her past, who she is, what her lineage is, making a name for herself outside of that, free will, all the stuff that usually comes with vampirism.
Yes.
I'm not going to refute anything you said about her being underwritten or that there's not much for her to work with here. But it's one step further than just a poorly written female character. It plays on this kind of mystical trope of the entranced woman from a vampire, like someone who can enter their dreams and influence their behavior in a way. So when you get to stuff like I only had to dance with her, it's that part of the movie is so messy because Eddie Murphy says that he can only turn someone if they choose to, if they come to him, if it's their will.
He can't just pounce on her and bite her neck and make her a vampire.
Right. So he influences her, and this confused me as well the first time I watched it. It wasn't that he just has to dance with her to turn her into a vampire. The dance itself has nothing to do with the turning. That is going to be as we talked in Don Juan DeMarco, like, he's setting up all these Neil Strauss the game moments that is kind of slowly manipulating her into giving over her will to him, and the dance is his last, like, his coup de grace of seduction. Like, she's gonna be sold and ready to go once I dance with her. And that's when he, like, gets her under his spell enough that he can say, you know, don't you want this life, and get her to say yes, and that's all he needs in order to bite her.
The chapter of the game where I decided, you know what, I can't live this pickup artist lifestyle is the one where it said you need to release a poisonous snake in the nightclub she's in, and then reach out and grab it right before it bites her in order to impress her. Like that it was like, I'm sorry, I do not want to get the reptile handler's license that I need to pull this particular play off. Yeah, I mean, it's part of a bigger seduction process. But what it means functionally is there's like, first it's like, okay, we're visiting this doctor, and the doctor's office is at the nightclub, and Eddie Murphy, the vampire, is there and comes out of the crowd and is trying to, like, convince her to dance with him on the floor of the nightclub while she is, like, halfway through interviewing this guy. And then later it's like him in disguise as the Italian face Goomba who's, like, got her at gunpoint in the restaurant. It's being like, come on baby, dance with me, and they're, like, about to do it, and then it gets foiled. It's like there are just a bunch of different scenes where the MacGuffin is dancing that they have to get to, which and it requires her to be both open to dancing at a time it would not make sense to dance, and then suddenly very opposed to dancing in a way that also doesn't make sense.
It's playing on these, like, vampiric tropes, like his sphere of influence. She has less willpower the closer she is to him. Yeah. That's not explained in the movie, but it comes from just, you know, general vampire lore, you know, through the decades of all these movies.
Yeah.
And I think there's a certain amount of, like, what movie did we talk about recently where, like, what level of awareness do we need to have for going into this? Was that The Butler?
Well, I don't know. Was it? Well, I mean,
yeah, it was when we were talking about the presidents and their policies. I'm like, what level of awareness of history do you need to have in order to understand this?
I feel like the more you know about vampires going into this movie, the worse off you are, because in a lot of ways, it is so confusing about it. Like, you need to go into it with just the vaguest knowledge of, like, yeah, sometimes they have pointy teeth.
It is confusing because there's a moment early on when Julius has become his limo driver.
Yes.
And he's turned Julius into a familiar, and in that process, Julius gets the dropsies, as you've been calling it.
Excuse me, Silas called it the dropsies.
Yes.
Dr. Dropsies called it the dropsies when he defined it in the DDR.
The DDR.
Yes, yeah. You do a little jig on the pad, and it explains to you about the dropsies. You drop it like it's hot. Actually, that's the song you have to dance to find it.
So there's a moment when Julius is driving him in the limo, and he's got the radio playing, and he's looking at him in the rearview mirror. And obviously he doesn't have a reflection, and Eddie Murphy gets annoyed with the volume of the radio, and so he shoots, like, cloud lasers out of his eyes at the radio, and it explodes. And then he's getting tired of seeing Julius look at him in the rearview mirror, even though he can't see his reflection, and so he does, like, a super breath, and it shatters the mirror. And I'm like, wait a minute, is Superman a vampire? Like, I've never heard of these powers for vampires before.
These are the real questions that we're asking. Is Superman a vampire?
He's kind of anti-vampire. Vampires disintegrate in the sun. He gets his powers from the sun.
Yeah, this is true. This scene has by this point in the movie, there have been enough big dramatic monologues from Maximillian that I am like, okay, Eddie Murphy's not doing comedy in this movie. But then this scene makes me doubt it again, because, like, Kadim has the music, like, cranked up, and it's pissed Eddie Murphy off, so he, like, you know, vaporizes it with his weird laser vision. And then he and Kadim are yelling back and forth at each other, and Eddie Murphy just goes, "Shut the fuck up! God damn it!" And I died laughing. It's like so funny. I'm going to incorporate that line read into my life now. And it's like, I just have so many questions about getting that out of him when he is so determined not to be funny. Like, did they have a good run going back and forth, and then like he let a little bit of comedy slip, and Wes Craven was like, "Gotcha, putting it in."
Yeah, I don't know. I get the sense that Eddie Murphy likes to play with other actors when there's a good riff going on. So it could have been.
But I just feel like there must not have been much riffing going, because if he'd been giving them any comedy bits to go with, they would have been getting put in the movie. But I feel like that's the only morsel of it that there was.
Okay, before we move too far away from Angela Bassett, who played, her character's name is Rita. We also need to talk about her job and the kind of love interest with her partner in this film. Because her partner becomes integral more and more as the movie goes on.
Detective Justice, her partner. Now, isn't it lucky that Detective Justice decided to go into law enforcement and not like, I don't know. He didn't become a what would be a funny job for a guy named Justice to do? Like, I guess a professional criminal. That would be ironic, at least. There's a cat burglar named Justice. My drug dealer's named Justice. I have to call Mr. Justice to get my weed delivered. I mean, that'd be kind of funny, wouldn't it?
Justice is playing the other kind of straight role in this film. At no point is he playing the comedy. He also has to kind of, just as much, if not more so than Angela Bassett, go between the real world and this cartoon world, because he's the one that interviews John Witherspoon at some point. Yeah, he has interactions with Julius at some point. And he has a big thing for Angela Bassett. Angela Bassett, I mean, understandably so.
Yeah, how could you not? Unprofessional,
Angela Bassett,
because he's technically her superior, but yes.
Oh, is it? I thought they were just partners.
Well, they're partners, but like I guess it's just that they're partners, but I think she's new to being a detective. It's like her first 3 months or so. Or maybe she's transferred in. Either I mean, even if they're equals, like it's very unprofessional, and that's the big issue with this movie.
But yeah, so it's kind of hinted that they both have a thing for each other, but have never, for one reason or another, done anything about it or could do anything about it.
When is it hinted at before the scene where her sexed up roommate makes a pass at him and then she thinks that he's having sex with her? Because up until that moment, I got no indication that she felt anything for Justice at all.
There is none. So,
okay.
But I mean, from that point on, the movie wants us to know that. So,
okay, yeah.
It's there. It's just not gracefully there.
Listen, foreshadowing is for cowards, and this movie doesn't use it. Yeah, so yeah, he's helping out in the investigation, and he's also kind of covering for her with the other cops because she has these weird visions. Her mom died in a mental asylum recently, and she's not, she's still trying to process that.
I want to make mention, though, that their captain is, because she doesn't really play too much in this movie, but fucking Joanna Cassidy killing it as the police captain here. She is, I love her in everything I see her in. Don't tell mom the babysitter's dead. She's just so fucking good.
Got very Italian there. She's great in this. She is so from New York. Like, her accent is the New Yorkiest accent this side of Kyle Budwell in Money Monster. Like, she could be that guy's mom, basically.
Anyway, she's fantastic. She is, and a good representation of a police captain, too, where it's like, she's not just the hard-nosed, like, get back to work, what the fuck are you wasting your time doing. She's like, seems a little supportive.
Yeah.
And gives them leads and helps them a little bit. Like,
yeah. And
kind of an interesting character in a otherwise film that doesn't need it.
Yes. Also, she's a girl boss. You wouldn't, you probably, when you hear police captain in a 90s movie, you probably assume it's going to be some big beefy dude, but you'd be wrong, you sexist. Women can be police captains too. So, okay, what else from here? They are investigating. They wind up where do you want to go, Landon? Do you want to talk about
I don't
the
know.
Vampire Hunter? Okay, okay.
I feel like we need to return to some things like the nightclub. I feel like we need to address some things that we haven't yet, like her roommate, her nightmares. I don't know. I'm willing to go anywhere with you.
Okay, well, so and she soon will be willing to go anywhere with Eddie Murphy once he starts his seduction process. Their investigation of the dead bodies on the boat, they find the boat's manifest or whatever that has a bunch of writing in a goofy language in it, which the police take it to the university, and the university says, hey, take it to this doctor, and they go to see the doctor who has looked over the book, and this is the guy with the nightclub.
In this process, Angela Bassett, Rita's experience starts to get these kind of mystical, vampiristic flashbacks and flashes of things. When she's on the boat, she gets this flash of seeing herself come out of a coffin and grab for her. When we cut away from the investigation on the boat, we see her walking down the street. It's New York. There's no one on the street.
Yep. That was it. There was another issue for the movie that they didn't have the budget for lots of cars and extras, so New York looks very deserted.
But it turns out it's a dream sequence anyway. It's a nightmare she wakes up from and starts to paint it. She paints her nightmares, which we talked about a little bit, but comes into play more directly later on.
Listen, Angela Bassett, like going from her getting attacked in this nightmare to her waking up thrashing and writhing in bed and leaping out of bed terrified by a dream, as someone who suffers from night terrors and as someone whose girlfriend suffers from him having night terrors, seeing this scene really, like, representation is important is all I'm saying. I felt really like it felt very authentic and true to my life experience.
I'll tell you what, I'll be the first buyer of the painting you do of your nightmares.
Yes, I know. Well, it's usually it's a lot of very aggressively painted pictures of just me thinking I see bugs running all over things. So I don't know how valuable that's going to be on the art market. Basically, though, they wind up going to this goofy doctor. He's not a goofy doctor. He's actually very serious. But this doctor's nightclub to talk to him about the book, which he's analyzed, and he basically tells them, yo, this is a vampire situation you've gotten yourselves into.
He's not goofy. The nightclub is goofy.
Yes.
The nightclub is like what I would expect to see out of a movie like Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
Or like Idle Hands or something. Like, just it feels like it was costumed by the, like, goofy hat shop in the middle of Disneyland. You go in there and you put on one of those old Dr. Seuss hats that are like, or Cat in the Hat hats that are way too tall.
Yeah.
And like have the fake dreads on it.
Yeah,
like,
you put on Blossom's hat to get in the door.
Yeah.
Like, if you don't have a hat, that's the hat they give you.
It's the Hat Club.
It's the Kit Hat Club. I feel like this seems like the sort of club that, like, Batman would go to find a suspect either on the TV show or in
what Tootsie there. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, or in the Tim Burton movie he'd go there. It's a very weird club, and at the same time Eddie Murphy has been chauffeured there by Julius to try and make his first pass at getting Angela Bassett to dance with him. And in the process, a snake that for some reason is in a cage or in a tank behind the bar, Eddie Murphy hypnotizes it to break through the glass.
It was pretty commonplace in the 90s at nightclubs and family restaurants. I mean, do you not remember ever going to a rainforest cafe and seeing all the terrariums with tarantulas in them and the water tanks of eels running around? And
I think no, because again, this is the age gap. By the time I was going to restaurants, there was a snaking section and a non-snaking section, and my parents always had us sit there.
Oh my God! I just had a flashback.
Yes.
I had a dropsy flashback. I was at...
That sounds bad.
Holy shit. Okay. I can't remember the name of the mall, but it's by the Palace of Auburn Hills in Michigan.
Listeners, right in.
And there was a rainforest cafe inside there. And I remember walking... Like, we parked by the rainforest cafe, and we were waiting for someone in our party. And while we were waiting there... outside the Rainforest Cafe, someone with an artificial leg was sitting there, and their leg just fell off.
It dropsied?
It dropsied, and I don't know what the situation was with them at the time. It's not really a story. It's just an image in my head that I had forgotten about to this very moment. It took seeing Kadeem Harrison in Vampire in Brooklyn and talking about Rainforest Cafe to unlock that memory in my head.
Yeah, that's your MK Ultra deep cover training. Like now you have to go and assassinate Gorbachev or something. That seems like the sort of shit that Eddie Murphy the vampire would pull, though. He'd make a guy's prosthetic leg fall off with the power of his mind in order to take advantage of a situation.
Yeah.
But, so he goes up and he's trying to put the moves on Angela Bassett and get her to dance, and she's being responsive to this weird, creepy man in a long red coat with what I am told is a wig on, and is about to dance with him until Kadeem comes up and basically cock blocks him by trying to hype him up and be tell her all about what a good guy he is and how good he is in bed and everything, and she gets put off by it.
He tries to be a wingman, but his wings have fallen off his body.
Yes, he
rotted.
Yeah,
he flopped to the ground.
Yes, he flew too close to the sun. Icarus, the first sufferer of the dropsies, because he dropped back to the earth. So that's kind of the first strike against in this scene.
Yeah, and again, I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but in one of the ways that he starts to seduce her or introduces himself is I saw you in a dream, and it's kind of playing on that. He knows he's influencing her mind a little bit, and so now he's addressing it in real life, and it's one of those ways that you're making it seem like fate, because I've been dreaming about you, and now I'm saying that I've had a dream about you, and et cetera, et cetera.
His line is, "I saw you in a dream, a woman with a smile so lovely it could brighten the darkest night. But she was trapped in a prison where the moon never shined. She could never escape because she didn't know how." And I'm just
God. Get the reminiscence music.
Yeah, Nick Bannister right now talking to Rebecca Ferguson. But again, and these are lines that he's delivering with total intensity, completely straight, and you're not. And you're sitting there am I supposed to laugh at this, or am I supposed to take this seriously? That is the great tension of every scene in the movie, is trying to figure out, is this a funny scene or a dramatic scene?
And he's kind of laying the groundwork here, and I'm going to skip ahead to a point when he's about to pounce, which is he meets Nikki in an alleyway. Nikki, the roommate, has sex with her, kills her, and introduces a conflict between her and her partner, and the partner starts to, or she starts to pull away from the partner romantically. And he has this part in VO that he's talking to Julius and explaining, but he says, first you take away everything that she has, and then you give her everything she needs. And that's kind of the very first echoes of that start in this club scene of him, kind of entering her subconscious, so that when it gets to the point where he's manipulated all these things that stabilize her in her life, suddenly he's the one guy with this kind of affluent lifestyle or sense of power that can bring stability back to her life.
Yeah, you're again I feel like taking a pretty charitable read of the movie, or the fact that all this is laid out or set up particularly well. It felt to me.
It's not. No,
it
but
feels,
it's there.
It feels more like happenstance, because basically after the club, she goes back home to her apartment where her horny roommate is, and then Detective Justice comes to talk to her about hey, what the fuck was that weirdo talking about, it being vampires or something, and they kind of have an argument. Her roommate is coming on to him, and then she goes back into her room, and Justice leaves, and her roommate follows him outside, just so desperate to get him to have sex with her, and he walks away, but then Eddie Murphy comes up to her, and she takes Eddie Murphy upstairs, and they start having sex harder than anyone has ever had sex, and she comes back out of her room and hears it happening and assumes that it's Detective Justice, and this is the first time we get any sense that she cares about it, because she just goes, "Damn you, Justice! Damn you!" So it feels like watching all this happen. It doesn't seem like this is part of a master plan on the behalf of Eddie Murphy the vampire. This kind of just seems more like he's just having sex with people and kind of making shit happen.
He needs a feed.
Yeah,
it's feeding time.
And
he's improvising.
Because she gets so mad, and we know Eddie Murphy's good at improvising. Angela Bassett gets so furious that she turns and runs back into her room, slams the door, and then she goes out onto the fire escape with an easel and is furiously, just angrily painting so hard. And an elevated train is going by, which then masks the screams from her roommate as Eddie Murphy turns the sex into murder, and then blood begins dripping out of the keyhole.
Suggestively. According to your mom.
According to my mom. Okay, well, let's not. I indulged in fantasy.
You went there first.
No, man, I went there first. I just don't want lore to develop that my mom is drawing comparisons that in fact I am. I would say, as far as her roommate is concerned, obviously it sucks that her roommate dies. However,
her
roommate,
however,
her roommate died happy. I mean, maybe like the very end, she wasn't, but she was having a real good time right up until like 5 seconds before she died.
Well, okay, let's do a comparison because we have a proxy from this season. How would you compare Nikki's death to Disco Dottie's death?
Man, I mean, I think Disco Dottie...
Go out doing what you love.
Yes, I think Disco Dottie still comes out ahead because it was, like,
yes,
totally under her control and everything, and it was a lot less violent, but, you know... And also, Disco Dottie's death at least meant something to Ryan Philippe at 54. Like, her roommate's death really means nothing to nobody. Anyway, basically... Eddie Murphy has orchestrated a situation now where she thinks that her partner, who is kind of the main obstacle to him getting with her, is hooking up with her roommate.
And this is exactly where we get that line of take away everything she has and give her everything she needs. So, like, that's why it's to a degree. I'm not saying it's very like effective, but the IKEA parts are here to put this together.
Yeah, sure. There's a little Allen wrench and a couple of screws in a bag that you can use to make the plot points hook up together, so to speak. I do love though that after this, to kind of cover for the death of her roommate, there's this letter from her that she finds, or that Angela Bassett finds in the morning. Like, her room is completely empty of all its things, and she's like, I've found a man and I've gone off to move in with him, but. We then flash back as she's reading it to Eddie Murphy is sitting in Julius's apartment writing this letter in her handwriting, but he's sitting at a table completely nude. And it's another of these moments that I'm like, movie, wait, if I'm supposed to laugh at this, it's not being edited for laughs. But I don't know how Eddie Murphy shot the scene of him sitting naked at a desk writing a letter in a woman's handwriting with like smiley faces and isn't playing it for comedy. It took work to make this not funnier than it is.
Yeah. Oh God. So, okay, let's go into the next scene at the risk of doing this chronological, because like I think you just gave a good segue into like, okay, Eddie Murphy is doing a serious performance, but at a certain point falling back on safety, we get like, okay, Eddie needs to cut loose a little bit. Let's write in him playing alternate characters. You talked a little bit about the Italian thug he plays.
Yes,
again, it's not well done, but to the screenplay's credit, it's there of him going, take away everything she needs, gives her everything, or take away everything she has, give her everything she needs. I'm going to get to her through her faith. And the lines are, granted, the dots to connect the lines are very far apart, but she's going to go seek out Faith, her pastor, in the light of her roommate dying. That's tangentially makes sense.
Yeah, and look, I think that the stuff that happens here with her preacher is kind of some of the more effective stuff in the movie, because he finds preacher Pauly, who is the preacher at her local church, who also inexplicably drives a VW bus with like preacher Pauly painted all over it, which makes him seem initially like, okay, he's some kind of like weird off-brand preacher who does like weird tent revivals or something. But no, he has like a congregation.
He does house calls.
He just okay, that's good.
So he does exorcisms.
He's got
You never know when you need a mobile preacher.
Yeah, he's got a bag full of rope in there in case he has to do an exorcism. It's great. But yeah, so he kills him and then takes on his form because I guess Maximillian basically operates on T-1000 rules now.
I guess so. Yeah, it's a little that shape-shifting is a thing for vampires, but like the way it's done in this movie, not so much.
So and like preacher Pauly is just it's Eddie Murphy kind of in a low-grade fat suit with. And his face is just shiny. He's just
so shiny.
He's the shiniest.
His face looks like I kind of want to take a bite out of his face because I love black licorice. I realized I was towing the line of a racial joke, and I don't mean it that way.
No,
I genuinely love black licorice, and his face is so shiny.
As do I. Look, as do I. We're both black licorice fans on this podcast, the only two in the world. He is as shiny as Liam Hemsworth in the last song when they're hosing off with that baby oil hose after the mud fight. Yes. So he's doing this over the top preacher character, but I feel like also. He's not really cutting loose that much. Like the character isn't okay.
It's proto-clumps.
Proto-clumps is the virus that causes the dropsies. So I'm just trying to get the word out there about it. But I guess he does do a little bit because like he's talking to her at first, like one-on-one as they're walking into the church, and he's trying, she's talking about all the issues that she's having, and he's trying to like give her bad advice that will drive her into Maximilian's arms. But then the rest of the congregation sees him and is like, "Oh, it's time for you to go on," and they pull him into the church. But then all of the crosses are burning him because vampires don't do well with that shit. So he's like, he in his over-the-top preacher way tells everybody like, "Hey, let's get out and experience God's creation. Let's do church outside tonight."
And I don't want to overlook a moment that really made me laugh. He's getting pulled in there and sees all the crosses. Like he hasn't crossed the threshold to the church yet. He's just kind of like in that little vestibule.
Yes, but he's been invited.
The massive cross behind him is like making his scalp smoke.
Yeah,
and he's just looking from one cross to another, and it just goes, "God damn!" And everyone, like a jukebox scratching, everyone turns and looks at him. He's like, "God damn anyone who doesn't want to be outside on such a great night like this. Everyone, come on outside. We're gonna have the ceremony outside, the sermon outside."
Yeah. And so he's up on the the stairs into the church, like as his lectern, and he's got the choir behind him, and and Angela Bassett is out there among the whole congregation, and he launches into this sermon about how evil is necessary. And
evil is good.
God created evil, and evil is necessary. And if God created evil and evil is necessary, that means that evil is good. Evil's good, right? And then everyone's repeating it, and he's doing that. And I'm doing the extremely white man kind of summary of this. He's doing it in a whole black church way that we're all better off if I don't impersonate. But
thank you.
But then like the whole choir gets going behind him, harmonizing about evil being good, and he's like. Seeing the thought process play out, and I feel like this kind of was improvised a bit too, but seeing him just sort of like lay this whole thing out and work through it, and him turning the whole congregation to get behind this notion of evil being good is both funny and it's also kind of scary. This thought of like, you get an evil person in a position like that with a microphone, and he can get people to believe anything. It's like it's horror and it's comedy.
The one thing that is missing from here, though, is like this is a moment when it should be pushing its comedy harder.
Yes.
And like he gets to a point where he's giving examples of how evil is good, how bad is good, and he points just some random person in the audience and saying, "You went and found a sex worker." He doesn't use that term.
No.
And he points out this guy right next to his wife. His wife hits him with a purse, and then he starts going into, well, ass is good. Getting ass is good. And like, and it's really funny. But by that point, by like the end of this scene, there needs to be like a full-on gospel song happening with the dancing and everything to ass is good or evil is good, and it's kind of missing that height.
I the whole time I was like, okay, when is the gospel choir gonna kick in with evil is good, and when is Eddie Murphy gonna dance? And we didn't get it, and that was painful for me to miss out on that. He does, though. He ends on this great line about how ass is good, not evil, but if you get yourself a piece of evil ass, woo! It's a good scene out.
Dare I say, after this moment, I'm like, did little Nicky do this better?
Ooh.
And I got really conflicted.
You need to go talk to your preacher about it. And Adam Sandler impersonates him, and then it's the whole issue. Also in the course of all this happening, Detective Justice has come to find her, and they're having this argument about him sleeping with her roommate, and him being like, "I didn't do that. That's not true." And but then him as the preacher, he's trying to play up like, "Oh, this guy's sleeping around, but that's good that he did that." I don't know. He's trying to drive the wedge in deeper.
Yeah.
But then right from this, they then go to talk to the two mob guys who are the connections, like the mafia boss who sent out the two mafia guys who Eddie Murphy killed at the beginning of the movie.
This is a part of the movie that is, I mean, I can't pinpoint when this goes off the rails in terms of the comedy and the horror. It's much earlier than this, but by this point in the film, it being vignette-y all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Like, we get the church vignette, we get the Italian restaurant vignette. Like, all of a sudden, I'm like, I've kind of lost the through line here.
Yeah.
And like, is this a comedy? We dropped the drama for like a good 15 minutes in the middle of this thing. Like, where am I supposed to be here?
I feel like this movie starts incredibly strong. It is going very hard right out the gate. They blow up a dog in the first 20 minutes. We didn't
talk about that. That was when Eddie Murphy arrives on the scene because of the boat crash. He needs to get his coffin out of there to get it back to the apartment he's going to rent from John Witherspoon, and he's standing on the dock with all these cops around, going, "I'm not going to be able to get into that boat. How do I get it?" And a dog a police dog starts sniffing up on him, and he kicks the dog, and it launches the dog through the air.
He doesn't even kick the dog. He just looks at the dog and goes, "I bite too." And then the dog, the dog, like a big puffy cloud, explodes underneath him and shoots the dog up a mile into the air. It's the glee with which this movie kills a dog, a thing that no movie has the sack to do anymore, unless it's one of those weepy type movies about a person,
a dog's journey.
Yeah, a dog voiced by an aging male celebrity, and the whole point of the movie is that the dog tragically dies at the end. I don't condone killing dogs, but also it's. That the movie leans completely into it and has zero remorse is pretty cool.
They do that in the upcoming scene too, in the Italian restaurant with the cat.
Yeah.
And I've only seen this in two films. There's this film and there's Boondock Saints.
Yes. The 90s were a big time for shooting cats.
Both of which distress me in a variety of ways. In different ways. Obviously, Boondock Saints is much more visceral. This one is just unexpected.
Look, at least in college, you didn't have every guy you knew coming up to you and saying, "Hey, have you seen Vampire in Brooklyn? That movie's so good, man." Oh,
I wish they did. That was me. I was going up to people going, "Have you seen Vampire in Brooklyn?"
Yeah, you had the Vampire in Brooklyn poster up in your room. You're constantly quoting Vampire in Brooklyn. So they go to the nightclub where they briefly encounter this guy named Guido being thrown out, who is also played by Eddie Murphy.
This is the Italian restaurant, not the nightclub.
This is the nightclub. I'm sorry. Well, yes, it is the Italian version of a nightclub, which is a restaurant.
Hey, now.
Okay, that's untrue.
In The Sopranos, they own a strip joint.
Yes.
Sir.
Okay. That's you. Now lecturing me about The Sopranos is actually an insult to my heritage as a TV person. So that's the offenses are flying fast and furious over here. But so they go in to question the mob boss about this. Eddie Murphy playing this like low small time crook mob guy has just been tossed out.
And I just want to take a quick detour to say, like, he's playing Eddie Murphy playing an Italian American here, which like goes back to his SNL days, where there's that very famous skit where he, as Eddie Murphy, says, "I want to go experience the world as a white person for a day," and it's just an incredible, hilarious skit where like he's just getting free money from people.
Yeah,
and like, but like. Just kind of interesting. I haven't seen him play that sort of character since his SNL days.
I mean, well,
and this is only the second movie where he plays multiple characters.
Yeah, well, in his first one, in Coming to America, he does play an elderly Jewish man who is inexplicably hanging out in a black barbershop the entire time.
I totally forgot about that. Again, I haven't seen that movie in forever, but you're right. I'm completely wrong there.
It's honestly, it's pretty funny. It's funnier than this one. You can tell in that movie Eddie Murphy is having a really good time doing all of his kind of Borscht Belt Yiddish shtick. I mean, it's kind of like I'm Gumby, damn it. It's a little bit of that. But
okay, Truman, there was a half a second during the first watch where I'm like, okay, Truman has wig blindness. Is he gonna know this is Eddie Murphy as this Italian actor?
You know, Landon. For one thing, I know I am hip to Eddie Murphy's tricks. I know that when you're watching an Eddie Murphy movie, especially from later in his career, it's like there's additional Murphys. But also because I was watching this with Amazon Prime and the X-ray function, which is the only good thing a tech company has invented in the last 20 years is X-ray, because so I could pause and immediately see Eddie Murphy playing Maximillian and also Eddie Murphy playing Guido up there on the screen. But so they go in to interview the guys, or the mafia guys, and then Maximillian and Julius are outside planning their next move. This whole movie is kind of like Rocky and Bullwinkle shit of like, you know, like there's always Boris and Natasha are always like 2 steps behind them trying to scheme what they're gonna do. But then Guido comes up and tries to hold them up, and Eddie Murphy, vampire Eddie Murphy kills white Italian Eddie Murphy and takes on his form.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again, to try to get with Rita, aka Angela Bassett. I want to kind of speed toward the end here, because the end is worth talking about extensively, but there are a couple things I need to get into as well.
Okay, do we? I mean, I agree we should speed toward the end. Let's at least mention he then, as Guido, goes into the Italian restaurant with a gun, holds up Angela Bassett, like takes her hostage, and he's going through this whole elaborate thing where he's like, "Hey, let's make you some dinner. What's your favorite kind of pasta?" And she's like, "Fusilli." And then he's like, get some wine. What kind of wine you like? Red wine. Oh, yeah. And then...
See, this is the vampire's version of the game. You assume someone else's form, do recon on a person, and then when you meet them as yourself, you know all this stuff, and it seems like fate when you tell, like, I'm going to make some fusilli at home. I've got a bottle of red wine. They're like, oh, my God, those are my favorite.
Oh, my God, my favorite kind of pasta, the key to my heart. Yeah. I mean, listen, maybe that's an Italian stereotype. I just love that she, in these moments where she's being held at gunpoint, she's like giving genuine answers to his questions.
Yes.
It's like, listen, I recognize that you're trying to kill me and I'm in peril, and ordinarily I would just say whatever it takes to defuse the situation, but yeah, I'll be honest, it actually is fusilli.
It's what they teach you at the police academy. If you're ever in a hostage situation, just keep talking, tell them genuine answers, because they're going to know if you're bullshitting, and you're more likely to survive an attack.
All right, now listen up, cadets. Here's the thing about Italian mafia guys. If you lie to them about pasta, they can tell. So you have to be truthful about your pasta preferences.
Okay, so I want to take a quick detour for 2 things. One is Wes Craven, and one is horror noir, and horror noir specifically in the 90s.
Okay, sure thing.
Let's talk about Wes Craven real quick. Just kind of going more overview of this film and it being a horror film more than a comedy.
Yeah.
Again, he's an icon by the time he comes to this film.
Yeah.
Like, he was a former high school teacher who decided to do Last House on the Left. Can you imagine your high school teacher being like, yeah, I made this little movie?
Yeah, this completely fucked up movie.
And then he follows that up with The Hills Have Eyes, which is another explosive and controversial movie.
Yeah. None of my high school teachers were that fucked up. I mean, one of them got arrested for doing some other fucked up stuff, but it didn't make any movies.
The thing is, like, he could have left it at that and just kind of been horror canon already. Just like these two hugely influential and controversial movies. But after, he tried to pivot a little bit after that. He made Swamp Thing, did not work. He did a TV movie, did a few other little things. But then by 1984, he does a little film called A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Oh, are you a fan of that movie? Did that have any effect on you?
If there's anything to rival Eddie Murphy in terms of wisecracking people in the 80s, it's Freddy Krueger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. His famous wisecrack, bitch. No one can top that. Oh, the quality of the writing in those films.
So after Nightmare on Elm Street, he only does the first one. He does a movie called Deadly Friend. But then he does Serpent and the Rainbow, which we've talked about a little bit before. And that was his first attempt to, like, make more of a serious, more of a drama than a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely got horror elements. No one's going to refute that. But it's based on a true story. Here's the thing about Wes Craven, too, is, like, he's incredibly intelligent, like Tommy Lee Jones level intelligent.
Yes, the benchmark for all human knowledge, Tommy Lee Jones.
Who do you think taught him in English high school to write poems?
I don't care.
So, like, he's bringing a level of psychology to all of these films that a lot of other horror directors just don't have.
Yeah.
But Serpent and the Rainbow, starting with Deadly Friend and Serpent and the Rainbow, followed by Shocker, don't do that well. He does a film that's really well remembered and kind of re-examined as a cult classic called People Under the Stairs, which is notable to this film only in that it casts a black lead, a black boy, in the role that is surviving in this house with a actress who has an inexplicable cameo in this film, Wendy Robbie.
Oh.
She comes in as the crazy lady at the police station when the Guido has been brought in.
Yes, after taking Angela Bassett hostage. Yes.
Yeah, he influences Wendy Robbie to create a distraction so that he can transform and get out of his handcuffs.
Yeah.
So we can
transform into a black man in a police station where no one will give him a second look or be weird to him at all.
Wendy Robbie and Everett McGill, who play a married couple on Twin Peaks, play a really fucked up married couple in the People Under the Stairs.
Okay.
After that, he goes back to the Freddy well and does New Nightmare, another, like, intelligent take on that, where it's like the first of his meta movies, where New Nightmare is, what if Heather Langenkamp, who plays Nancy in the first film, is experiencing nightmares of Freddy Krueger, and the movies of Nightmare on Elm Street start influencing the reality for Wes Craven plays himself in that movie. Anyway, it's a fantastic film. That's the film he makes right before this film. So he comes into Vampire in Brooklyn right off of A New Nightmare, which isn't the Freddy Krueger movie everybody wanted. That movie did not do as well as he'd hoped. This is his 12th film, and worth mentioning that he learns a lot from this movie about how to do horror comedy and takes that into his next film, Scream.
Yes.
Which he's already got one massive horror franchise under his belt. He's got 2 horror classics under his belt. And then he goes and just creates the genre-defining horror franchise that we're still feeling the effects of to this day. I think Wes Craven might be the most influential horror director that there has ever been.
Absolutely. And look, the trailer for Scream scared me so fucking bad as a child. It was a thing where I was awake at night and sobbing, and my mom was like, what is wrong with you? It was literally just a trailer. There was nothing even in it. That movie, which I finally watched like a year or two ago, really good. Hot take, Scream is good. This is the thing about Wes Craven. And again, you are the expert, I am not. This movie is not good, but his directing makes it so much better than it would have been otherwise. Like, we have watched a lot of bad movies on this podcast that are boring, that are very static. Like, the camera is always kind of moving around. There is this sense of high camp to everything. There's a lot of, like, characters will whip around dramatically and there'll be a sting on the soundtrack, and, like, you know, it feels like you're watching a big old juicy movie watching this. He's very good at just putting some spectacle and fun into everything, even if everything on screen is nonsense and is ridiculous and you can't engage with it. Just looking at it is entertaining, and I appreciated having his steady hand on the steering wheel.
Completely agree with you. And, you know, even though I just said he was one of the most influential directors, like, I think this is a good example. Wes Craven is a great example of my kind of anti-auteur theory mentality, because I think he really sees the value in letting the other departments do the best work that they can and contribute equally to the movie in a way that other directors have too much of a stranglehold over.
Yeah.
He inspires them to do their best work, and I think any of his films demonstrate that. This one in particular. Sometimes when the bad ones come across your plate, you can more easily see the talents of somebody than not.
Yes. And this is why you should always let the bad ones in.
I also want to just talk real quick about horror noir in the 90s. Are you familiar with horror noir?
Gonna say no, but then you're gonna start describing it, and then maybe I'll know what it is, and I'll probably interrupt you and say, "Oh, I do know that," so because I want the audience to think that I'm smart. So let's start.
If I did a little more research, I would have some like specific facts for you, but I feel like it's a pretty recent term that's been attributed to movies that have a black voice behind them, whether it's mostly black lead cast, black writer, black director, about black stories that are horror.
Here's how dumb and white I am. I heard horror noir, and right up until now I thought, like, oh, okay, so it's like a mystery and there's like gumshoes in it, like kind of the, you know, if there was a horror aspect to Reminiscence, that's what they're going for. Okay, horror noir. Okay, gotcha. Continue, please. Tell me about horror noir.
Yeah, there's an incredible book that kind of outlined it, and, you know, all of the different things that can go into it. There's a great documentary as well that I recommend people go check out. But the 1990s were kind of a interesting time for horror noir, because mainstream horror kind of died out in the 90s.
Yeah.
And what took its place in a lot of instances was the kind of urban flavored horror films that kind of started, even though it didn't get much distribution at all, with Death by Temptation in 1990. I would include People Under the Stairs by Wes Craven in 1991 for that. But in a big way, Candyman from 1992 plays into that. And then in 1995 was a massive year for it with Ernest Dickerson's Demon Knight, Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. This film, and then one of my all-time favorites, Tales from the Hood.
Not to be confused with Leprechaun 2 in the Hood, or Leprechaun 6 in the Hood. When did the Leprechaun go to the Hood?
Yeah. He went to the Hood in 6 and 7.
Okay, so he was back from space, and then he went to the Hood.
Is that right? Or is it 5 and 7?
Wait, so he went to the Hood multiple times. He couldn't get enough.
He went twice. Yes, he went twice.
Only once to space, but twice to the... Well, I guess the Hood is more accessible than space. It costs a lot to get into space.
but this is kind of, after 1995, it takes on a very different patina. So like the next one that you could maybe classify as horror noir is Blade. Also starring Angela Bassett, also a vampire film.
Also a better movie than this one.
But equally campy in a different way.
Sure.
And then also in 1998, Toni Morrison's Beloved with Danny Glover and Oprah and a number of other people, which is a great film, but not in the kind of campiness of some of these earlier 90s films. So
yeah.
This film, I think, is very much in that conversation, though, because the story is originated by Charlie Murphy, Eddie Murphy, their stepfather. It's, playing, you can kind of map the vampiric folklore over top of the like African American Black experience in America to a degree, and start to draw some interpretations from that if you wanted to.
Yeah, and I mean, in researching this movie, like, this movie has legs and a cult following, I think, especially among Black film goers. Like, one of the writers has said that, like, as years have gone by, quote, "There are people who love this movie and know lines from it. I live in Atlanta, and whenever it comes up with people in the community, it's met with such a positive response and wide grins." Like, there seems to be like a lot of real genuine affection for this movie. Like, no one is arguing this is a great piece of filmmaking, but in terms
right.
of, a movie with a Black cast that is just like a lot of fun performances and wacky, insane, over the top, zany stuff. It's it's loved in that way.
And you can identify another vampire in Brooklyn lover by introducing yourself or saying hello by saying "Ahoy, motherfucker!"
Yeah.
And if they know what you're talking about, then you know you're in good company.
If they know what you're talking about, they say, "Shut the fuck up! God damn it!"
Okay, let's head toward the end of this movie because I feel like it picks back up in a way. Like,
yes.
There's a lot of production stories talking about that this was supposed to end very differently, and it had to end in basically Eddie Murphy's apartment, the character's apartment in this film,
yes,
which has TARDIS syndrome. It's like bigger on the inside than it is on the outside.
All of the effing apartments, all of the New York City apartments in this movie are huge compared to the New York City apartments I have actually stayed in. But yeah, and also the TARDIS syndrome. He mentioned Julius's apartment looks like a crack den when he first gets there, but then before Angela Bassett comes up to visit him, Max casts a million spells on it to make it look like a sharper image catalog.
Marble floors, lots of gold, like
orbs. There's just some decorative orbs on tables.
Decorative orbs.
Yeah, you gotta have a decorative orb every once in a while, just as a treat. The whole, she comes up there on a date with him. They dance. I could explain how, but who gives a shit?
But they do finally have the dance, and she succumbs, and he bites her neck.
Yes.
Now, I have a question for you about this, though.
Yeah. Tell me what's the question.
The question is, like, he sets up, I can only turn her into a vampire if it's her coming to me through her will. And she says yes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So he doesn't tell her that he's turning her into a vampire. He is talking about, I can give you this lifestyle, and, you can have security. You no longer have to worry about this, that, or the other thing. But he's not, like, giving her the whole deal for her to say yes to. So
yeah.
It seems like there's a gray area, and I'm wondering how much of this is, like, mystical, spellbound, vampire bullshit of, like, she just needs to say yes, or how much of it is some sort of weird, fucked up moral thing. He's like, good enough.
I mean, this is the vampire version of the 3 pages of terms and conditions that you scroll past and just check the button so you can, like, be on Spotify or whatever. It's like, it's just, yada, 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 eternal life, yada, yada, yada. You're a servant of the darkness and can't go outside in the daytime. I gotta say, the scene with them dancing in the apartment, they're dancing to No Woman, No Cry, a song that I first became aware of when they performed it on Muppets Tonight. That dance scene kind of works for me, and just like
Me too.
taken in a vacuum of like a dramatic moment, like the way that it's shot. It's a lot of kind of sensuous fades between them and them like looking really intensely at each other. The chemistry between Eddie Murphy and Angela Bassett is off the charts, and like it's this moment of like I cannot believe that like one scene before this you've got, you know, Kadeem like grabbing his crotch to make sure his dick didn't fall off on account of the dropsies. It's I don't know, this bit works. It's very and then when he like bites her neck and she starts undergoing the transformation, and at this point there's like, I don't know, 25 minutes left in the movie. Seeing that, I'm like, oh shit, I wasn't expecting this to happen. I'm genuinely surprised. And to this movie's credit, compared to other ones we've done, you look at Simone, a movie that introduces a concept of a computer lady and then does not.
That's a Frankenstein movie. That's not a vampire movie.
Ah, yes, of course. Well, I mean, it's put vampires are already sexy. That movie was just trying to put Frankenstein on the level of a vampire by making it sexy. But like that introduces the concept of a computer lady, and then it's just let's just have the same thing happen again and again until the movie stops. This movie, God bless, there is escalation. It's like I have to dance with her. He tries a couple times, and then it succeeds, and then she's turning into a vampire, and then okay, we're like scaling things up for the third act. Not a lot of bad movies are able to like follow that basic principle of just escalation. So I give snaps to that.
I agree with you. Yeah. This is okay. So then we got kind of two concurrent things happening here. As Rita is pulling away or being pulled away from the investigation, Justice is kind of left to pick up the pieces of all these murders that are happening, including Nikki, which he now finds crucified and sees that it is in the same manner in which Rita had drone it,
yeah,
painted it from her nightmare, and starts to put two and two together that like we're after a vampire. This weird dude is after Rita. Rita's starting to act weird.
This dude who acts like a vampire might be a vampire. Who knows?
Justice goes to check in on Rita, finds her after she's been bitten, and she's in bed. And she is like wrestling with this a little bit and starting to feel the vampirism come through her. And she tries to bite him.
They start making out and hooking up, and then she starts biting him.
And she has, just kind of a conflict of heart as she realizes what's happening, and she can't see herself in the mirror. And she's like, "Oh fuck, I'm turning into one," and runs screaming from the room into the night.
Is there a vampire would? Is there anything in the game about what to do when you go back to a girl's place and you're making out, but then she starts turning into a vampire and has a personal crisis and goes running out of the room? Like, is there anything about how to come back from that, or do you just take the L?
It's all about preparation. In fact, you should have put garlic in the pasta that you made earlier so that you can protect yourself, weed out all of the vampires before it gets to that point.
The reason that the pickup artist community isn't that big of a thing anymore is because most of them got killed by vampires. and listen, vampires, thank you, valuable public service. I appreciate you doing that.
Okay, the last little bits here. She runs back to Eddie to kind of yell at him for turning her into a vampire, and
just give him a stern talking to. Dracula, god damn it.
There's this other thread of like her father not knowing who he is, and like that's been sort of playing in the background. I wish it was more important because he like holds it over her here, tells her that she's born of a vampire, and because without that, this moment, which should be cool and has cool elements to it, just kind of falls apart. Which is he's trying to tell her how cool it is to be a vampire, and there's this like awesome little moment where he steps off the roof and flies backwards
really
and
neat.
Like flaps his cape in a kind of cool, like only the way Eddie Murphy could do it kind of way.
Look, say what you will about this film, there's some good cape stuff in it. They do real good cape work.
But just kind of showing her the power of a vampire that she now has and just needs to embrace.
Yeah. She says something to him like, like he's saying that he's a vampire, and she says, no, that's not true. That can't be. And he says, what if it is? And then he just starts drifting away backwards off of the roof, and like the fog is drifting around him, and the music is hitting
Yeah.
really hard. And it's, again, like, in this sucky movie, Wes Craven made that scene fly.
So, long story short, you've got like Justice with the investigation, going to find Dr. Zecco and like identifying eventually, okay, we need to go find Maximillian. We need to find Eddie Murphy and kill this vampire and save Rita. And you have Eddie Murphy and Angela Bassett like struggling with the vampire stuff. He's trying to take her out to feed, and she's resisting, and eventually it comes to a head back at Maximilian's apartment.
Yes. You know, the transformation is about to be fully complete. Like, they're about to, like, he's got Silas, the landlord, there, and is, basically, he has him incapacitated and is trying to get Angela Bassett to drink his blood, and when she does, that will be the end. You know, she'll be fully transformed. But then Justice bursts in, and he's got this staff, this vampire-killing staff that he's gotten from the doctor, and there's a fight, and he's incapacitated, and then Angela Bassett is up and cozied up to Eddie Murphy like she's gonna, like, go all in and become a vampire and drink Justice's blood, but then, whoops, no, instead she stabs him in the chest with the thing, and he turns into a bat, which I guess is a thing he does now, and not a wolf anymore. When you die as a vampire, you turn into a bat, but when you're alive as a vampire, you're a wolf. This is basic scientific facts. Everybody knows.
Those are the lore of vampires, at least on the silver screen. Is that they can turn into mist, they can turn into bats, and they can turn into wolves.
Yes, when you know in that sex ed class in school, they take all the girls into one class, all the boys into another class, and then all the vampires go into their class to learn about which things you turn into.
Truman, that's a night school.
Put it on the board.
I want to talk about like this ending. Like, yes, they had to adjust a lot due to budget, due to behavioral issues and commitment and stuff. But
coming out of trailers, yes,
it kind of hooks back into the horror comedy working for me again. Like, most of the middle of this movie doesn't, but then like when Dr. Zecco takes the giant vampire killing spear, like shoves it into Eddie Murphy, and Eddie Murphy's just like, really? This is my stomach. This is where my heart is. Yeah. Like, it's a really funny, unexpected moment.
I know. It's like, oh, last 5 minutes of the movie. Now we'll do a little more comedy for you.
Yeah. He also sends Julius to like stop them while he completes the transformation with Rita, and Julius is like, no problem, boss, and starts like doing Bruce Lee sort of cartoony moves, and in the process like slips, falls, his head hits the ground, his eye pops out, and he's chasing his eyeball around for the rest of the scene
until it gets stepped on.
And then Justice like takes a step into the room and steps on his eyeball, and like when Justice gets back up, like he's lost all like, we're not fighting anymore. He's just like, hey man, just if you see my eye, don't step on that shit. I need that.
Yeah, when Julius gets back up, that's the but then like the real happy ending to this movie though is that Julius, who's just fully falling apart, looks like a zombie at this point. Like, the face makeup on this is really doing the trick. But he runs downstairs and is, talking with Silas about everything that happened, and they see that Eddie Murphy has died and flown away as a bat. And then they get into the limo. It's Silas up front and Julius in the back. And then as he's opening the sunroof, Eddie Murphy's ring falls in.
Yeah, this is very confusing to me.
It is very confusing. Again, vampire lore can be whatever you want it to be. He puts on the ring and immediately transforms into a vampire who no longer has the dropsies and is elated to find out that all of his bits and pieces are back together. And then he tells Silas to start driving. Basically, Silas has now become his familiar assistant, whatever. And he says like, there's a new vampire in town, and his name is Julius Jones. And I gotta say, I'm happy for Julius. Julius got the short end of the stick in this movie, but now he's back. He looks really cool. Everything grew back. He suffered a lot, but he's doing okay now. And also, Silas seems to be helping him out mainly out of the goodness of his heart. He's not transformed Silas into a ghoul. It's just Silas is like,
I know.
I lost my job at the pier. I feel like the landlord thing isn't going to pan out because the building got destroyed. Maybe I'll just drive this vampire around now, who's also my nephew.
I don't want to skip over, as we're at the end of this too, of like in these final scenes with Eddie Murphy and Angela Bassett as they are kind of wrestling with each other. This was really effective to me, that like he's about to bite and feed and feast, and he's interrupted, and in the process of that he pulls back, and his like bestial form, like this really, really ornate makeup is on his face.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is cool. Like, you see the suave and sexy vampire, before he's like feeding, but like when they're feeding, it turns into like the animal form. And when she stabs him, like it goes even further, and you see the like all of the masks peel away, and it's like the demon of vampire lore that is behind all of this. Like, just the biggest facial prosthetics you can think of on Eddie Murphy's face, and he plays it so well. I think that's one of Eddie Murphy's top talents, is just being able to utilize facial prosthetics to, as we've seen, comedic degree, and here for dramatic effect.
And
it's really, really impressive, and it's a little bit on Angela Bassett's face too.
And well, look, while we're giving credit to the facial prosthetics, this is as good a time as any to mention the prosthetics guy for this movie, Howard Berger, also did the prosthetics for a little movie called Boogie Nights, where he made the big penis that Mark Wahlberg pulls out at the end of the movie. That is a true fact, and you can look it up. So a lot of great stuff happening in this guy's career in the late 90s.
Every movie a Mark Wahlberg reference.
As you've told everyone, he is one of my dear, good, close friends.
How's old Marky doing these days?
He's doing great. We were just talking the other day, because it was 9/11 recently, and we were talking about how if we'd been on that plane, things would have gone down differently. So anyway, on that note, Vampire in Brooklyn.
Deep dive Mark Wahlberg references.
I'm sorry. If you don't know that Mark Wahlberg suggested that he could have stopped 9/11 and saved everyone on Flight 93, you're not a true fan of our podcast. And if you didn't know it, now you do know it. Look it up. Yeah. It's hilarious. That's how his mind works.
Something only Mark Wahlberg tells his best friend, so that's why Truman knows it.
Yeah, we share a lot.
Okay, let's start to wrap this up. Why do you think this film was forgotten? Let's start there.
I think that this movie was forgotten because it's impossible for audience members to know what they're supposed to get out of any given scene. Yeah, it's just like we are veering between Shakespearean levels of drama and monologues and high drama, and then like
high camp.
High camp, and then also just sort of like low tier, just sort of vulgar like slapstick comedy, but also even some of the most slapstick moments with Kadeem having the dropsies, it's like it's comedy, but in a way that's kind of disturbing to look at if you are, say, a young Landon Solano. And so it's this movie never fully picks a lane, and it makes it hard for audiences to categorize that sort of thing. So I think because you can't slot it into, it's that really funny comedy or it's that bad comedy movie I saw, or it's that bad horror movie I saw. You can't categorize the type of bad movie it is, so you either don't remember it, or alternately you do remember it and it's a cult favorite, because there's also an argument to be made that the movie machine fucked up, and this is actually not even a forgotten film because it has a lot of defenders, more so than I think anything else we've done.
Short of the last song, which I don't even think really is a cult movie, but I digress. We covered that in that film.
Okay, great. Why do you think it was forgotten?
I completely agree with you on all of that. Like, this is a comedy that never quite hits comedy heights. This is a horror film that never quite sufficiently grosses you out or terrifies you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of discussion in the horror community about how hard it is to do a horror comedy. And I think this is a good example of, like, there are horror comedies that are just painfully not funny.
Yeah.
And there are horror comedies that are like not even attempting to do horror. This is an interesting case where it's like just so precisely down the middle of both of those lanes that, yeah, it's just like it's not memorable in either category. And I think, like I said in the Money Monster episode, this also has superstar syndrome. Like, the next year, Eddie Murphy reinvents his career with the Clumps.
Yes.
Or Nutty Professor.
Well.
So, like, you're remembering his new, you know, like he has his 80s phase and then he has his 2000s phase.
Yeah.
Late 90s, 2000s phase. And that's what you're going to remember of Eddie Murphy, not Vampire in Brooklyn.
And it's really the same for Wes Craven. I mean, his career, which was already, like, he had made some great things, but his entire life went supernova with Scream, and this is just like... both of these guys were about to just enter a completely new era and with their next movie, and this was just this is a speed bump.
Yeah, I would say this is like the platform that they're building the rocket ship on, and once the rocket ship goes off, it just incinerates this film.
Yes, precisely.
So we come to a question. I am so curious where you're gonna fall. Should we send this back to modern memory or leave it forgotten?
I mean, and again, acknowledging that a lot of people already remember this movie, so who knows how much juice this determination has. I actually vote that we remember this movie simply because it is so wild. It is so... like, I've talked a lot about how I like it when movies are weird, and I think that the worst sin a movie can create is playing it completely safe. This movie does not play it safe.
Yeah.
This movie makes a lot of bold swings and misses frequently. And I think that it's got some really fun performances in it, and again, I can't be mad at it, and I think this movie is really bold and a really interesting snapshot of a thing that Eddie Murphy tried and didn't really do again.
Yeah.
So I say
something that not a lot of people do or even have the go ahead to do these days.
I think that if you're trying to get an assessment of Eddie Murphy and what he can do, I think this movie is an important data point to have mixed in there with all of the good movies he made.
Yeah.
What about you?
So interestingly enough, this is the first episode where midway through the episode I changed my opinion.
Oh, I'm that persuasive.
Or you no, it was just,
or you weren't listening to me and you were just thinking your own thoughts the whole time.
It was the kind of joy of reliving the movie. I watched this twice for this, and both times it went by breezy. There's no slog to this.
It's a real
helps.
Coors Light of a movie. It just goes down quick.
And talking about it was a lot of fun. And I think I was ready to say forget it, and if you want a horror noir comedy, go seek out Tales from the Hood, which just does all of this stuff like to a T. It's so good. It's so funny. It's so dark. It's so gruesome. It's so well written. It's so well directed. I was ready to go say, forget this movie, go see that. But for all the things that you said and articulated, this is just a weird experiment of a film that I don't think would be made today. It can't exist at any other point except for two people who are icons wanting to cross paths, and Wes Craven wants to make a comedy. Eddie Murphy wants to make a horror film. This is what you get.
Yeah,
and
let them fight.
This is interesting. It's not good, but I would watch it again if I had to.
This movie today would be not released. David Zaslav would can it and write it off on his taxes, basically.
Yes.
The fact that this disaster happened and formed into a film, and that they put it in theaters and we guess we got to make money off of it. That's fun.
So I'm confirming. Let's send it back to modern memory, and I think that's the only third film this season that we've both agreed to send it back to modern memory. And if you look at the pantheon that's forming, there's no rhyme or reason. We've sent Simone back, we've sent the last song back, and we've sent Vampire in Brooklyn back.
I think the last song, already, as I've said, a perfect and flawless film, could be improved if Liam Hemsworth's character was a vampire.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
I mean, they really would have been on the bleeding edge of what teen audiences wanted at that point in time if he had been trying to vamp her up.
Oh my God. All right, well then let's wrap this up, and we'll see everyone next week for Truman Caps. I've been Landon Solano.
And for Landon Solano, I have been Truman Caps, slowly but surely recovering from the dropsies.
See you next week, folks. Long!
Movie Memory Machine is part of the Gruntwork Podcast Network. Join our Patreon at patreon.com/gruntworkpodcast to keep the machine running. Theme song by Porky's Groove Machine. Rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. For more information on today's show, visit MovieMemoryMachine.com.